Good evening. This meeting of the Board of Education for August 19th is now called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewing audience. All items that will be voted on this evening have been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website, and you can link through that through the board website on PPS website, and it will also be archived there for future reference. Just a note that Director Morton is absent this evening. At this time, we will have public comment. Ms. Houston, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Yes, we have 6. Our first 2 speakers are Deborah Barnes and Margie Brown.
I don't see Ms. Barnes in the house, but Ms. Brown. While you're making your way, I'll just read the instructions for public comment. I'd like to thank you very much for taking time to come to our board meeting. We deeply value public input, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board lies in actively listening and reflecting on the thoughts and opinions of others. The board will not respond to any comments or questions at this time, but the board or staff will follow up on various issues that are raised. Please make sure that you have left your contact information, either phone or email, on the sign-up sheet. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration when referring to board members, staff, and other presenters. While we value everyone's perspective, our rules do not allow criticism of individual staff members by name during public comment. You have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name, spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of testimony, a green light will appear on that little box. When you have 1 light remaining, a yellow light will go on, and when your time is up, the red light will go on and a buzzer will sound. At that time, we respectfully ask that you conclude your comments. We sincerely appreciate your input, and thank you for your cooperation, and thanks for coming.
Margie Brown, last name Brown, B-R-O-W-N. As co-chair of the Portland 80 Percenters for Education Excellence, I attended the July board retreat, and my comments center on the district's commitment to improve student achievement results, otherwise called outcomes. While I appreciate the fact that the milestones of student achievement compact multi-year goals were discussed at the retreat, we believe there should be a deeper, more concentrated, and continuing focus on academic achievement. Recognizing that there are many pieces to the puzzle, it is only by putting a spotlight on the outcomes that PPS staff will give the milestones and compact term goals the attention necessary for our students to achieve and progress to be prepared for college and career at an increasing rate. Reaching these goals are crucial for our city, and they won't be accomplished with the business as usual. Innovation and change are necessary. We propose that the board require PPS staff to provide a simple 3-part oral quarterly report, which would include what are the quarterly processes or project goals of selected key departments for achieving the year-end graduation rate and 3rd grade reading outcomes in the compact agreement. What was accomplished during the last year's quarter, including preparation during the summer, and what are the significant plans for the next quarter. It is only by focus, and more focus on the few critical initiatives related to student achievement that PPS will be able to move the dial. You can't wait until the end of the year to find out if we are going to be successful. You need to have both process and outcome measures during the year to track progress and ensure that adjustments are made and best practices shared to keep us on course.
Thank you.
Our next 2 speakers, Michael Kelly and Ayanna Horn.
Can you have my contact?
My name is Michael Kelly, and I'm the parent of a student at MLC. Michael Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y.
And my name's Ayana Horn, H-O-R-N, and I'm also the parent of a student at MLC.
Members of the board, Superintendent Smith, thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak tonight. As a consequence of the recent negative publicity regarding our school, MLC, a group of us felt compelled to come here tonight to share an alternative perspective and make public our commitment to resolving the issues at our school. At MLC, we are a family. We are the village raising our children. It doesn't matter what race you are or ethnicity. It doesn't matter what house you live in or the car you drive. If you are part of the school, then you are part of the family. And it's not just the children and the parents, it's also the educators and the classified staff and the school leadership. Our principal, Makari Trinum, and Jeff Spalding, our vice principal, we are all family. This single fact makes MLC an amazing place, unique among schools. I'm tempted to recommend that you take it as a model for other schools, but I'm not convinced that you could replicate it. As a consequence, you should expect that we will be fiercely protective of it. Sometimes this puts us in conflict with the district, and sometimes the conflicts are internal. No doubt this is not unlike any vibrant community that plays such a vital role in the lives of its members. In that respect, we are not unique. But perhaps we can be unique in our response to these conflicts. At this time, can we have the members of the MLC community who are here in support of the following commitment please stand? Those who are already standing, raise your hand.
We, the members of the MLC community who stand before you, are uncompromisingly committed to constructive engagement in the resolution of these conflicts, engagement with the district, engagement with the school leadership, and engagement with the members of our community who find themselves in conflict. And we will endeavor to do this with courage, compassion, self-discipline, integrity, and respect, the 5 key character traits MLC expects of its students and traits befitting of all members of our family.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all who came to join. We've heard a lot of, had a lot of comment and correspondence about MLC. Thank you for sharing with us this evening. Ms. Houston, before we move on to the next, oh, I'm sorry, did you have, yeah.
As to, do I have an additional 10
Yes.
minutes?
Mhm.
Okay. And what I will read now is my family's own personal perspective. We are Ayana and Tim Horn, and MLC Parent Volunteers of the Year. And we have 2 children, one a rising 2nd grader at MLC and one who has yet to experience the beautifulness that MLC is. As a proud and active parent of an MLC student, and as one of the few families of color, our perspective and experience is quite different than some of those that have been expressed regarding MLC. While we are active supporters of MLC at this community, we feel it is important to bring to the board's attention that recent public statements about MLC, and our principal in particular, is not a perspective shared by all, and not by our family in particular. Having worked with Principal Trainum and many teachers over the past 2 years, we are largely encouraged at the potential growth MLC has yet to tap, and feel that Principal Trainum specifically is the right administrator at this time for our school. I understand that change, while sometimes challenging to embrace, is as constant as learning. And by working together with the administration, constructively and collaboratively, I feel that we are on a clear path to strengthening the learning environment here and making it more attractive and inclusive to many more students and families who can truly benefit from the unique learning experience that MLC continues to offer. Please understand, while I do understand and recognize that opinions differ, I feel the leadership here at MLC is making the best decisions for all of our children while taking into account the varying array of opinions. As a family and together with other families, we stand in support of our principal and the staff at MLC as we work together to realize MLC's potential as a school and as a community.
Thank you. Ms. Houston, before we move on, I just noticed that Ms. Barnes made it here, and I know that we skipped over her spot, so if we could call her up with the next.
So Scott Bailey and Deborah Barnes.
I heard traffic is terrible out there, so.
Thank you. For the record, good evening. I'm Deborah Barnes, and I am the first vice president of the Oregon Education Association, but I come to you tonight in my role as the president of the North Clackamas Education Association. I sat through a couple of your bargaining sessions, and my district the past 2 times has gone through IBS, interest-based strategies, in a collaborative environment. I actually addressed my own board last week for the first time that they met and explained what I had seen. And they said, really? Why aren't they doing what we did? And so I have to ask that question. We're all public educators. I understand the position you're in. I was on the Milwaukee City Council for 2 terms. I answered to my constituency. But I know in your heart you wouldn't be in this position if you didn't care for kids and if you didn't respect the educators that you've hired to serve those kids. So from my perspective, from the outside, from another large school district, and as a leader who has to bargain, there's nothing better than to be able to share a margarita with your superintendent when you're done bargaining, or sitting and having a conversation with a school board member during bargaining and saying, you know, this is my perspective. The one thing we learned going this way is my superintendent had no idea, as did many of my board members, what a room clear was when we went through bargaining. And a room clear is when a student who has multiple problems decides to act up in class, and the rest of those students have to go stand in the hallway until that student is finished. Well, when we brought those pictures to the board who bargained with us and the superintendent, that opened up this whole different conversation and things changed. I'm going to urge you, I know it's late in the process, but start building capacity with your union leaders. Start building capacity with your community. Many community members sit in during these bargaining sessions, and they're looking for guidance from board members who will stand up and say, I believe in my teachers, I believe in our staff, and I know they're here, and everyone in the public is bouncing on us right now. Look at Oregon Live. We need to work together as a team. It pays off. The last thing I share with you, at the end of our session, our superintendent, our community, our business leaders, and both the association staff of the classified and certified sat together. We went down to Salem last session as a team with the board and bargained and sent our message to those members at the legislature. We were so much stronger working as a team than as individuals and as separate associations. Think about that as we move ahead. Nobody wants the dirty laundry in public, and I know each of you wants the school year to start off right with all of this over with. So please, on behalf of every public school teacher in Oregon looking at you guys right now, stand with those folks and find a solution as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't read the comments on Oregon. Repeat after me. Good evening. My name is Scott Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y. Thanks for listening to me tonight. I do want to say before I start that I'm lucky I have a job with flexible hours. I can leave early and get here at 5 o'clock. There's a lot of people who can't do that. I'd ask respectfully that you consider pushing the public comment back to a later point in the meeting to allow more people access. Okay, my 3 minutes are starting. I'm here on behalf of our Portland Our Schools. Portland Public Schools has put equity at the center of its work, and we'd like to bring to you an equity issue tonight for your consideration. We're in favor of shifting the school year to a balanced calendar, in which the school calendar would be adjusted to shorten up the summer break, and there would be several 3-week breaks during the year. In other words, the same number of school days because of funding, but spread out through the year. There's been a number of articles in the media lately about this, one in the Sunday Oregonian, I think it was. There's a Slate magazine article that cited research that showed that that just the differential impact and the huge amount of the achievement gap that appears to be caused by the long summer break. Lyndon Darling Hammond has been in town a couple of years ago saying the same thing. And recently in June, when the Jefferson Cluster principals were testifying to you, Kim Patterson of King talked about the importance of not only that extra 3 weeks of instruction that kids got, but that it shortened the school, that break. And she thought both factors were important in the improvement in achievement at King. She also thought that PPS should lead the whole metro area towards a balanced calendar school year. That would enable all the child service vendors to be on the same page in the same market. So I'm in my last minute here. Finally, you've increased the equity formula for high minority schools. And I think Trudy Sargent brought this up when Kim was testifying, whether it might make sense to use some of that funding to add a couple of extra weeks to the summer break as opposed to dropping class sizes. Balanced calendar school year is the cheapest way we can think of to have an immediate effect on the achievement gap. If it's going to happen in Portland, it's really essential that you guys take the leadership in making it happen. We would firmly support you in that and help with all the public process that we need to happen to make that happen. And hopefully we can all work together to drag our metro area into the 21st century. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our last speaker is Reese Bushman.
Thank you for your time today. My name is Reese Bushman, and I'm a proud parent of an MLC student. We have an amazing school. I unequivocally support the statement that was read earlier by Michael and Ayanna. It's a wonderful declaration of reclaiming the traits and the values of our school that can sometimes be challenging to uphold. And they've not always been present of late, unfortunately, especially when we reach different conclusions or see things from a different perspective. I wanted to personally make a statement to you today beyond that, because I recognize that you in the district have not heard a large portion of the MLC community at all. Please be aware that there are many more varied opinions than what you've heard. I don't pretend to speak for the entire school, but I think I can speak for at least a part of it. And in the spirit of the earlier statement, and in an effort to contribute to the needed healing in our community, I'll refrain from addressing specific stories and specific people. Despite the various different viewpoints of our community, we're united in our advocacy for the school and for our children. That's not always easy when we don't reach the same conclusions, and unfortunately each of our individual narratives has made it sometimes very difficult to see eye to eye. It's really been very interesting to see how the exact same facts can read so differently into each of our narratives, and that's been one of the challenges really for us. Our school is certainly unique, and in many ways it has a very long and rich tradition. For the most part, it's served our students extremely well. To me, MLC represents an incredible balance between more traditional and non-traditional learning, which you don't find very often in public school setting. My dad was a principal and a teacher, and I've learned quite a bit of that over the years, and MLC is really a treasure for us to cherish. Having said that, it's not perfect, and some of those imperfections are not newly developed. There are students at MLC who could be served better by the school. I'm sure that's true throughout the district, and I think that some of the concern over the current climate at MLC does not always recognize this, or sometimes the causes for it are misidentified. I support our principal, Makari Trainum, and I support her leadership. To me, her integrity is exemplary. I find her to be a tireless advocate for our children. She's demonstrated in many ways how committed she is in her advocacy for each and every one of them, even at the cost of her own reputation. She's demonstrated to me that she clearly values what she believes is right for our students, more than she values herself or her own ego. Not an easy thing to do. The attention she's drawn to some needs at our school is critically necessary, but it has not always been well received. I think in many ways fear and misunderstanding has colored how some of those efforts have been seen. The rich 45-year history and tradition of our school and the special place that it is can sometimes unintentionally draw away from how it can be improved. And I believe that our principal is uniquely qualified and committed to shine a flashlight on some of these areas so that we as a community can work together to help make our school even better for all of our students while still preserving, and this is important, what has made it so special. Please help our community, all of our community, including our principal, so we can both preserve and improve our school. MLC is a treasure. It requires your protection. I think this is true more now than ever before for our administration, staff, and community. We need your help to survive the pressures and preserve some of the unique and invaluable traits that make it such an incredible place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, again for your comments. Please make sure that our board secretary has your contact information if we're going to follow up so we can send you some information. Moving on to the next item, the annual survey of public education priorities has been moved to another agenda. I believe it'll be the first meeting we have in September. So with that, we're going to move on to some very exciting news about our substitute contract. Superintendent Smith?
Yes, and I'll ask Sean Murray, who's our Chief Human Resources Officer, and Brock Logan, Director of Labor Relations, to come on up and talk about our substitute teachers contract.
Thank you. Good evening, board members and superintendent. My name is Sean Murray. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for the HR department. I also have Brock Logan with me, who was the chief negotiator for these rounds of contract negotiations. Before the board for consideration is the adoption of the substitute teachers contract that covers July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2016. Having negotiated 12 times, including 2 sessions within mediation, the parties were able to reach a tentative agreement on May 10th, 2013. 4 major topics that are included in this contract includes the implementation of the ASOP subsystem, which changes the way substitute teachers are called for assignments. Also, health insurance, the elimination of sub-only plans, which move subs to the same plans as other employee groups, with the cost savings to the district of about $40 per affected sub, which translates to approximately $50,000 a year. Also added is a provision to help keep long-term, consistent working subs from losing insurance benefits and a clearer process for employee discipline and building restrictions. Any questions?
I don't think so. I just want to say on behalf of the board, we're very happy that we've reached common ground with the PAT substitute partners, and we look forward to continuing the good work that brought us this settlement. Thank you both. We'll now consider Resolution 4795, the 2012-2016 agreement between Portland Association of Teachers Substitutes and School District Number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon. Do I have a motion and a second? Director Regan moves and Director Adkins seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 4795. Ms. Houston, is there any public comment on the resolution?
No.
No. Is there any board discussion on the resolution? Okay. Seeing none? Yeah, indeed. The board will now vote on Resolution 4795. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 4795 is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Davidson voting.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the audit report. Last year, the board commissioned Richard Tracy, our auditor, to look at high school graduation rates. Mr. Tracy, welcome. I see you're coming to join us.
Thank you.
We'll start with your presentation, is that correct? And then we'll have time for our questions.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you very much for scheduling this presentation. This is a large and complex topic, as you well know. And I looked at a piece of it. And what I did was want to compare Portland to others and to see what we can learn from what other districts are doing, both in Oregon in other states as well. So it's a big topic that could go in many directions. A little of this background information I just wanted to share with you, which is in the audit report, which I hope you've had a chance to review, and I'd answer any questions that you might have now or at the end of the presentation. There are any number of things that cause graduation problems or dropout problems. There are probably three major ones: attendance, behavior, and basic course performance or academic performance. Those are the research over and over basically points to these three things as being some of the major factors that contribute to graduation problems and dropouts. Oregon, somewhat surprisingly, has one of the lowest graduation rates as a state in the nation. And our district has one of the lowest in Oregon, as we'll get to a little bit later. The state and our district is engaged and has been engaged in now for a number of years of ways to improve it. Both the state and their 40-20 plan, and with our milestones, and with our high school system redesign is all connected to this notion of improving graduation rates and reducing the number of dropouts. I won't go into the high school system design. We've covered that. Certainly I can ask some questions. I'm sure that Superintendent Smith can answer some of those better than I can. But it's involved in this whole discussion that we will talk about today. So jumping into the results from the audit. I looked at the 10 largest districts in our state for the 2011-12 cohort group, or class, if you will. And compared to the other large districts, we are the lowest at this stage. As we'll find out later, we've improved over the last 4 years, but we're still at the low end when we compare ourselves to other large districts. Our completion rate is about the third lowest, and our dropout or non-completer rate is about average compared to the state and to our other large districts. This is the table that's in the report, and it shows basically the categories that I just talked about. And it shows that Portland Public Schools is at the low end of these 10.
Mr. Tracy, before you move on,
Yes.
For folks that might be looking at this and not sure what the difference between a grad rate, a completer rate, and the dropout rate, sometimes we hear folks say things like, well, with 37% dropouts, using the inverse of a graduation rate.
Right, and it's not exactly
Right.
at all the inverse.
So can you talk a little bit about what each? know
I
it's
think
in the
that the
report.
most confusing part of it is the non-completer or dropout. When we look at dropout rate, that's calculated by basically enrollment at the beginning year and what it looks like at the end of the year for all 4 grades, as opposed to this, which is looking at one class or one cohort for 1 year, what happens at the end of 4 years, as opposed to a dropout, which is simply that 1 year from the beginning of school to the end of school, and what happens in the number of students that drop out. And it's in this report, there's a definition of those two measurements in the appendix hopefully gives a little clarity on that. Does that help?
It does. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure for folks who might not have access or go through reading it.
That's right, yes. And it is a confusing topic. So looking at a little more detail about our cohort, our 2011-12 cohort, this group that we've talked about, I wanted to look at special student groups. And those student groups relate to underserved ethnic groups, excuse me, economically disadvantaged students, limited English proficient students, and also students with disabilities, to see how we compare to the other 9 large districts in our state. Once again, we don't compare favorably, particularly with economically disadvantaged students or with students with basically underserved ethnic groups, which basically includes Hispanics, Native American, Pacific Islanders, and Black students. We are about average or so with the limited English proficient students, and a little lower than other districts when we look at students with disabilities. And so even with some districts that have very comparable student groups than we do, for example, Hillsborough or Salem Kaiser, they're doing better with these more difficult student groups than we are. So that also is a problem for us. Now, we look over a period of time, however, we do see some improvement, both in the graduation rate statistic, but also in the dropout rate statistic. The last 4-year period, Portland has increased its graduation rate from 53.3 to 63.1, about a 9.8 point improvement. Some of this is due to some degree with some errors that we had in the data and some corrections that we made a couple of years ago that improved the statistics, but other could be real improvement that we're seeing in the work that we're doing here in the district. The dropout rate has also improved over this time frame from 7.5 to 3.4. We're still, some districts have a better dropout rate or a higher dropout rate, and some districts have a lower dropout rate, but we are improving more than the other district in this statistic over the past 4 years. So what I also wanted to do so that we could learn and inform the discussion about what to do and how to continue to improve was I did some case studies. I selected 6 districts, 4 in Oregon and 2 outside West Coast districts in Long Beach, California, and Seattle, Washington, and in Hillsborough, Salem, Beaverton, and Long Beach, just to see what they do, how they describe themselves. So I had several interviews with principals and with management employees and others in the district to learn about what they do, both in terms of the factors that affect graduation rates from their perspective, major interventions that they might pursue, alternative schools, and the management model they might employ to manage their district, to see if we could learn something that we could apply. There was a lot of things, and I hope you have a chance to read the case studies. There's lots of different things in there. I pulled out 4 I thought were sort of interesting highlights. They're not the only things that I think are interesting about the case studies, but for the sake of time this evening, these are the 4 I thought were kind of interesting and perhaps we should learn more about. One is that some of the successful schools in having better graduation rates and lower dropouts had a very intensive and systematic focus on attendance. That they really focused on it. And I know we focus on attendance too, but not in a systematic or rigorous fashion, particularly as Hillsborough does. They have a quite interesting attendance manual and a process for focusing on attendance. Low attendance being one of those major factors that affect graduation rates. So that was one of the things I thought was interesting. Some of the other districts do as well. Some of the districts had a real focus on coaches and mentors, really individual coaches and mentors to help at-risk students and to deal with dropout issues or students that had low attendance. A real more systematic approach to looking at helping individuals. I thought this was interesting. I don't know if it means anything. Some of the districts were reducing their reliance on alternative schools or options. Seattle had as many alternative schools as we had a decade ago. Now they have a handful of alternative schools. Salem has reduced the number of alternatives they had. Different kinds of districts, different kind of communities. I just thought it was interesting that there was a trend for using alternative schools less than we do. And also there was, particularly in Long Beach, and this is probably an interesting factor. Again, I don't know how much this affects graduation and dropouts, but there was a a real exposure to career and college, both at the elementary school and at the middle school. Long Beach even had a kind of a commitment, an agreement that they would have with students that they would learn and think about college at the elementary level, which is quite remarkable. So there's this connection to something that happens beyond high school. Was, I thought, an interesting highlight in the case studies as well. I also wanted to look not just at, anecdotes and comparisons and what people have told me when I interviewed these other districts. I hope that's not me. I wanted to see what some empirical information, that there has been studies or academic research that actually has shown or proven in more than one location some success in reducing dropouts and improving graduation rates. And there were, I thought, 4 or 5 interesting things. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to go backwards here a little bit. One of the factors I wanted to make sure you understood is that our district does many of the same things that other districts do. So it's not like we're not doing things. We're doing a lot of things. And some of the things that are important to this district that other districts use are early warning systems. We have this academic priority where we identify students that really are having either academic issues or behavior issues or attendance issues. That's a really powerful tool that we have. To the degree it's used throughout the district, that would be another topic for an audit. Do we use this fully and as completely and as effectively as we could? That I didn't learn about. We have a number of support classes and teams, English algebra support, credit retrieval options. We do a number of things that other districts do that point to good things happening. We have this high school graduation initiative project, which is a federal grant, which is really probably the real good pilot case of intensive focusing on with students. Mentors, coaches, using individuals to address students' needs. That's probably the best example we have here. It would be wonderful if that was available throughout the district. It's very similar to what Salem has in their graduation coaches and Hillsborough has on their care teams. That's very similar to this pilot project we have at Roosevelt and Franklin. And we have a variety of educational options, plus we do a number of things in tutoring and after-school support through Sun Schools and other activities, Step Up and other things that we do. Now, getting back to what I was prefaced before in terms of the exemplary practices, these are practices that have had demonstrated success in more than one location. And I thought these are the ones that I thought made the most sense when looking at the What Works database that the federal government produces on educational research. One, what seems to work is a focus on attendance. What seems to work is an intensive engagement, student engagement, one-on-one engagement. More effort at the middle school level as more as a preventive factor rather than 9th and 10th grade. It's almost, you can catch them in the 9th and 10th grade, but some programs are finding if they focus more at middle school level, they're having more success being prepared when they get into 9th grade, which is obviously one of our milestones and one of the things we want to track that we do in our milestones. And then structured mentoring and after-school programs. There's a number of examples of these. We have a number of after-school programs. To the degree they're a system and they work together, I'm not so sure they're comparable to some others in other communities that I read about. So these 4 particular What Works examples are worth thinking about and to see how we do these things here in our district. And finally, I thought there was some need for additional information. It's always need for more information. When you start looking at these things, you want to know more. And the things that occurred to me in doing this that I wish I could have gotten more into was how effective are some of our approaches now? We do a number of things. Which ones work the best? Which ones deserve more focus? Which ones could we not do anymore? Those would be good to know more about. Student opinions about what works for them. I know our research and evaluation group did an initial survey of students a few years back about what they took and how they would rated certain interventions they received. That was kind of a good first start, but maybe there's more that we could do with that data, or a better way of learning more about what students think helped them stay in school. And finally, the fidelity of implementation. How consistently and completely are we implementing our current interventions and our current services? Again, we do a number of them, which ones work and how they are consistently implemented across our district, which is an ongoing problem with any large organization. How do we get people to do the same things in the same way for effectiveness in that regard? My recommendations are very, I would call them permissive in a way. There's so many successful approaches, there's so many ways to address these problems. My recommendations are really consider some of these things, to engage students, to reduce dropouts and increase graduation rates, and also to do some additional research and evaluation to learn what works and what students think and how we're implementing some of these interventions that we're currently implementing throughout the district. The report is available on the website, or at least you should be either this evening or first thing tomorrow morning on the board webpage, like all the other performance audits are. And as I've always said, when I do these presentations, the superintendent's written response is also included in the report. So you will be able to see how she responded to the report and the recommendations in the report. And that's my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
I have a few just questions.
Sure.
One is, could you just go back to the data figure, the correction? Because some of the improvement is due to corrections in the data submitted by ODA Portland to reflect more accurate. Page 16. Yeah, page 16.
Mm-hmm.
And you referenced it in your presentation, and it left me wondering. So could you give me a little more specifics about this?
Well, when we did submit updated information to the Oregon Department of Education, the data was improved and updated. How much was result of the data improvement, and what percentage of it was result of actual improvements in what we do? It's hard to tease those numbers out. That's what I was trying to say. So
the jump between 53 and 62 is
some of it's data.
But some, we don't know what some is.
Right. Yeah, whether it's 50% or 90% or 30%.
Okay.
Well, I think we do. I mean, what I remember is when we resubmitted our data, there was a change, and we knew exactly the percentage of jump. I don't remember it off the top of my head.
I don't remember it off the top of my head either.
I want to say, but there was a data.
So we know that.
But it was a
somewhere.
flaw that evidently impacted multiple years, so that by the time we corrected, we didn't go backward and keep untangling what the flaw was. So, and yes, we can identify what was
All right.
progress and what was data. I don't know that off the top of my head right now,
I was
though.
just curious because it just,
Yeah.
the word some in the report.
No, it was a category of how we were tracking a certain group of students that then didn't show up in the final data, that we then went back and corrected with Department of Education that impacted our data.
And I'm sorry for not being so specific about that. It's just that sometimes if I don't have evidence to show me, I use weasel words like some. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I appreciate that.
But yes, we can be more precise in that.
Yeah, I was just curious. And then you spoke with managers and principals of other districts, and in our district, you spoke to principals as well, or not?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I spoke to central management staff as well.
Okay. But not teachers?
Not teachers.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very difficult for me to talk to teachers, and it has been for last 4 or 5 years because they're in school.
Yeah.
And when I'm available, oftentimes they're not available, either doing prep or teaching. So it's always hard to do that.
And students?
I did not
Yeah.
talk to students, no.
And then I was curious if you could talk a little more, because I look at these numbers and the report, and it says to me, hey, other districts are doing better with less money. And so I find your recommendations, and I know strategically that you said they were permissive. And so, but I wanted to push you because I think that the report calls out for maybe a little less permissiveness. And so I wanted to push you on the, maybe a little bit of the management model. And you talk about other districts and how they're set up, and I mean, how much is in that piece versus things that we're doing, programs that we're doing?
Well, being interested in organizational management, I think management is a big part of making any organization better, from the leadership through executive management to principals. And I think it makes a difference if you have good management and if you effectively implement your systems. What I couldn't do is say how effectively we do that, because that wasn't the subject of the audit. It would be interesting to see, by visiting schools, and high schools in particular, but middle schools as well, how various interventions that we believe are being implemented are implemented. And that's something I wasn't able to do.
Right. And I'm not, I mean, my question is a little bit different, which is more of a systematic model. So, you know, so one is, okay, you have a model, how well is it being implemented? But you talked about several different models out there, and comparing those models to our model. Are there takeaways from your viewpoint?
In a couple areas. A few of the other districts have a clearer line from strategic mission and goals down into what each individual school does. There's you can see a clear line than ours, although, you know, we have milestones, we have measurements, we have a lot of the things in place that other districts do not. That clear from mission down through what we want to do is not oftentimes as clear. I did report before you were on the board on the school improvement plans. And those school improvement plans, when I looked at them, were varied in their quality from school to school to school. And that's one example of a more consistent connection and link between the mission and the goals of the organization and what schools do in pursuing that mission and goals is something that other districts do. But I think all districts have that problem because we have decentralized schools. We have different locations and different people manage them.
Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to, first of all, say that of all the audits that I've seen of yours so far, this one to me was the best in terms of really talking about what we are here to do, which is to educate kids and graduate them ready for college and career. And so there were just so many pieces of this audit that were helpful. And what I especially appreciated is the comparison to comparable districts and some of the sharing of best practices from district to district and what we can learn from each other, because we don't do that enough. And I think it would be good for us to get into that practice as we go. It's interesting to me that Oregon has one of the lowest graduation rates in the nation. And I think what we often don't think about is that fact that Oregon also has one of the shortest school years in the nation. Oregon has some of the largest class sizes in the nation. I mean, in some ways, it shouldn't be a surprise that our graduation rates are where they're at. And even for Portland Public Schools, until this year, as we're coming into this year, we weren't even offering a full high school schedule to some students. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of factors that kind of play into where you end up. So the good news is that we've got a much stronger investment from the state going into this year, and that's you know, a thrill. And the other thing that I always like to remember is that Portland Public Schools students represent about 10% of all students in the state. And to the extent that we, as a district, increase our graduation rate, it's going to have an impact on that state number too. So it really matters, not just for us and for our kids, but you know, for Oregon's reputation, perhaps. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and I'm not sure specifically that I need an answer. They're probably more for you, Superintendent Smith, as we go. One of the things that was highlighted in this report is that many districts are moving away from community-based alternative school programs. And I was curious to hear more about that and what the results have been and why they've moved them in-house, and whether that was a financial decision or was it an academic success decision. I know that we've struggled with some of our alternative schools in terms of the results they're getting, but they're also dealing with kids who have had real challenges. And so I'm curious if we are re-looking at that at some level.
So, and you know, this is one of the things we looked at during high school system design, and we actually went through a process of increasing what the standards are when we did our last request for proposals, and what the metrics are we're measuring, and working to align more closely what the alternative schools are working toward with what the district is, and they're included in our staff meetings and our professional development. During the last RFP process, we actually reduced the number of alternative school providers just by virtue of who was able to meet the increased standard and who was not. Our alternative ed providers have continued to work on a rigorous system of metrics that are being applied, and actually this year we'll be able to report to you on what the new metrics are, but we're aligning more tightly what's happening in our contracted alternative schools specifically with what we're doing in the district. So, and I imagine it's been, like, Portland has always had a really large number of alternatives relative to other communities, and people have frequently looked at us as being an innovative way of serving students. So like now we're on the, okay, yeah, how are we making sure that students are getting rigorous education if in fact they're in a community-based alternative that also has wraparound services, which is generally what the benefit is you've got a whole array of services that come with an educational provider. But we're continuing to tighten, and next time we go out with a request for proposals, which should be in the next couple of years, I would imagine we'll be again ratcheting up what's the expectation and how are we aligning it with what we're trying to do as a district.
I think but it also gets to the central or the comprehensive high schools too, and the whole question of referral and keeping kids in the comprehensives and regular education before they
neighborhoods
need to be referred.
Yes.
So I mean, so
it's the ecology of our whole system, and that's yes.
I remember during high school system design, we talked about there was in the report that we weren't matching kids very well, that we had kids that didn't meet the demographics for a typical alternative school, going to alternative school. And so I think the high school action team is, what I recall, working on that about how do we ensure a right match.
So we've got a couple active groups right now that actually are going to be using some of the findings of this audit and also just our own data. And the outcomes from high school system design and the report you got in December on impact 1 year in to implementation. But we have a high school action team that has across district stakeholders, including some of the alternative schools and comprehensive schools and parents and centralized staff. And then second, we are working with the cross-city parents coalitions, is working with our high school team on college and career readiness, but both are really going deep on figuring out, okay, how do we further tighten what strategies we're using and investing in, and what's the fidelity of implementation of strategies that work? I mean, that's the other thing, the Successful Schools framework we've talked to you about is system-wide, not just high school, really looking at where are we getting the outcomes we're looking for in our own system, and how are we then replicating and expanding across the entire system. So that's like, again, getting more and more focused, because we've done things that we see islands of excellence that we then have not successfully taken across the whole system. So.
Or ensure there is accountability across the system.
Or ensured we're in accountability. We haven't even really done full replication of things that we know are outstanding practices. So like, I think that's one of the things we're working to do. Yeah, and then once we're doing it, are we holding people accountable?
So I had another question I wanted to ask you about is your familiarity with what the Salem Kaiser School Foundation does with its funds versus how our Portland School Foundation funds are used. Because I know that the Salem Kaiser School Foundation basically funds dozens and dozens of mentors for struggling students. And I find it to be a really interesting idea, interesting model, and one that we could potentially even fund through the Portland Schools Foundation if we wanted to change the model. Have you had much opportunity to talk to the Salem superintendent about that and what success they're getting out of that particular leverage point?
I know a small amount. So what we are referring to as graduation coaches, and they've been really excited about what they've accomplished with that model.
The graduation,
Coaches is a little different.
Coaches are full-time classified
Yeah, that's a little
employees.
different.
The mentors are usually graduate students or other volunteers.
Young, bilingual.
That are trained
Young,
and
bilingual,
ambitious.
paid by the foundation.
Right, and they're trained in mentorship skills and then assigned to specific students, as the way I understand. Anyway, I would love for us to
Find out more.
understand a little bit better that model, because again, there is at some level a funding stream, since 30% of our foundation funds raised go to that. And obviously, it would also mean that we wouldn't do some of what our current foundation funds are doing, so we'd have to balance it. But I would love for us to look at that, and this just kind of highlighted it again.
Good.
As an option. I have a couple of other questions, but why don't other folks go, and then you can come back to me if you haven't hit them.
Do you want to let someone else go? Okay, I'll go ahead then. Thank you so much. I really appreciated reading this report, and it was just so inspiring to read the case studies and know that there's, while we're doing lots of great things, there's some additional things or similar things that we can improve in what we're doing. Trying to read my own handwriting here. I guess I also had the question about alternative ed, and I think I referenced, Superintendent, in your response that there was going to be a study, so that's what you were talking about, that there would be a study in terms of the effectiveness of the alternative ed. Anyway, I just generally wanted to flag that, want to follow up and hear more about that, because it came out as a real theme in the report and a question around that. Question of principal accountability, particularly for focus on academic priority students. That's a question that came up for me, and how we're ensuring that, again, the fidelity of implementation. I guess a lot of my questions or comments just revolve around waiting to see and hoping that the high school action team is going to be really covering all these details, and whichever, however they're going to be reporting back to us in the public. And then also the middle schools, just wanted to confirm, it sounded as if you were implying that that's part of what they're going to be looking at, because that definitely seems an area that we're, at least as far as I know, falling short. And it's a huge area that we should be doing more in. And just, we've always had this middle learner, we've had initiatives come and go, and so many, and then we had the whole K-8 thing. So right now we're working in a hybrid model of middle schools and K-8s, and just needing to always try to keep our focus on those 6th through 8th grader, 8th grade kids, and the transitions they're going to. And then I guess the other, just related to all of this, is just a question around, if you could remind me of the timeline for the high school action team. When are they going to be kind of at a point of reporting back? Or, I'm sorry, I never remember. They're in the middle of their work right now?
Yes, they were just convened towards the end of midway through the year last year, and we'll be doing reports throughout the year, and I don't know specifically when their first reporting date will be.
Do we have a board liaison on that?
So hang on just a second, let me ask Sue Ann if she'll come on up and speak to that question. Sue Ann Higgins.
You can tell there's a great eagerness.
No, Sue Ann Higgins is chairing the high school action team, and Sue Ann is our chief academic officer.
Good evening. The high school action team began meeting in April and is reviewing a number of studies. This, the work of Mr. Tracy's audit will be the next kind of data point. Additionally, we have a new study that we will be reviewing soon that is a deeper look, a segmentation study, so where we looked at how do you look at who's doing well in the schools, who's not doing as well in our schools, what do we make of that, and then how strong is our match of supports internally and externally for students who aren't doing as well, so that we have a really clear accelerant effect for all kids who may be struggling in the system. So that's the next step. Our goal is to have a report or a set of recommendations to go to the superintendent, hopefully by January. And the goal there would be that if there are any things then that would have bearing on the budgeting cycle for next year in terms of resources, that would then be in the conversation for that timeline. So that's our plan right now.
Great, thank you so much.
Do we have a board liaison or two to the high school action team? I think that was your other question.
I don't think so.
Okay, could we?
We do not at this time.
We
No,
can.
be happy to have one.
You know, like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Please.
Committee of the whole.
For now, yeah.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Mr. Tracy. As always, it's a wonderful report, full of great information and even more questions for us. The thing that kind of popped out to me on this report, in addition to all the things that the other directors have talked about, were the things around attendance, and also the reaching down into the lower grades to solve the problems before they start. Although we're talking about high school graduation rates, it seemed to me that the schools that were having success were those that were approaching students at an early age, especially around attendance. If they're not showing up to school in first and second and third grade, chances are they're not going to show up even more in middle school and then in high school. As you get further and further behind, they show up less and less. So I really was interested in all of the work that the different districts were doing around attendance and that reaching down into the lower grades. And I don't know, Superintendent Smith, if you can talk to us a little bit about what we're doing there. It seems like there was a pilot project or something that we had going around contacting students who had excessive absences early on, or parents or families, or if we don't, we should.
I'm going to ask Sue Ann to come on back up. While she's coming back up, I will say one of the things we're doing as part of Cradle to Career in the communities impacting youth is focusing on attendance across the 6 districts and really trying to look at the practices that are being most successful at and getting a common attendance structure for a common attendance policy across the 6 districts. But it's been the deep focus there. The other has really been looking at kindergarten attendance, because it ends up being the
That's what I'd heard.
It is. It's the predictor going forward. So if you can really get kids learning and parents learning good school attendance behavior in kindergarten, it ends up carrying through your whole trajectory of attendance. And Sue Ann, want to speak to any more?
So the place where we have the most explicit strategies is, as Dick referred to, in our high school graduation initiative program schools. So that was a federal grant. It is a federal grant, so we're starting the 3rd of the 5 years of that grant. It focused on the qualifying schools that had a graduation rate that was at or higher than the state's, a dropout rate that was at or higher than the state's dropout rate. At the time, that was Marshall High School and Roosevelt High School. And subsequently, we were able to move the grant over to Franklin High School, where a large number of former Marshall students attend. So students in the feeder schools to those 2 high schools, grades 6 through 8, as well as all the high school students, are supported and impacted. So it targets students identified as academic priority students. So it uses our own early warning system that we developed around these critical areas, the same ones that were referred to in the audit. And it provides mentoring, support, attendance, initiatives, and then we are about to launch our 3rd annual Come On Back to School campaign, and we invite the community to join us. So on our district website, you can go to Reconnect, and so what we've done there the last 2 years is send out community volunteers and district staff on a Saturday, to knock on the doors of students who haven't returned in grades 9 through 12 and invite them, notify them and their families of how much we want them to continue with us, to how to re-engage, what some options may be, try to find them a way to use our resources to unpack whatever it was that's been in the way for them returning to school and get them back. So we've had a high degree of success of students returning. Over 70% of the students who have returned as a result of those through our Reconnection Center work and looping out to all of our schools, including the High School Graduation Initiative grant schools. Over 70% have stayed a year later. So we see really good results from the work that we're doing there.
So again, I guess I would just emphasize the reaching down. And I love the part about starting at kindergarten and going from there. But I think that once you're in high school, I'm happy to hear about the 70%. That's wonderful. But I think that's harder to get those students to come back and to make them stay and to have them graduate. So, and nobody disagrees, I'm sure. So,
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy.
You're welcome. Maybe a question before you get up and have to come back.
Yeah.
So Superintendent Smith, in your letter of responding, several things jump out at me, but the first two steps, kind of next steps, are basically saying, hey, it's more than just about the graduation rate. It's really about making our kids prepared for life after high school, and whether that's in college or community college or with the trades or with community, that's what it's about. So that is, I think, really important that you put that in there. I'm curious to know, in terms of these, what the timeline, and frankly maybe on all these that we haven't covered, what the timeline is. Because these are all important things, and I think we need to know, okay, when's it going to happen? And so I didn't know whether on these, whether you, Sue-Ann, were the person.
So really our next step is to share this with our high school leaders, with the rest of our school district leaders, and to develop a work plan so that we really begin, so there are some research steps to implement. There are some, we see an opportunity to do site visits and really gather additional information, and then also to do practice sharing internally where we have this, where we're beating the odds within our own system. So we have some schools that are, who are clearly leading us in terms of changing our outcomes more rapidly than the rest. So the work of the High School Action Team, our work with the Parents Coalition, and our district and school-based leaders. So our next step really is to develop that work plan.
So like with the college career ready focus,
Yes.
we don't have a timeline for that yet.
So we do. So that's one piece that we were already in process with relative to our just our larger 40-40-20 goals.
So actually, all of these that are listed in here are at some degree of in process right now, and we could do something that lets you know, here's the next step as it relates to each one of these things. Here's what the timelines are that relate to each one of them, which is kind of, I think, what you're looking for. Like the 40-40-20, for us, our next step is really looking at what's our own baseline data, and the entire state is trying to figure that one out right now, because we'll essentially set a milestone that goes beyond our current set of milestones, that is what happens after kids leave us, and how do we track what that is, and how many of our kids are actually going on to 4-year, how many are going on to 2-year, how many are getting, but some of ours is knowing what's our baseline data. So like that one has kind of a data piece to it in terms of what's our North Star here. And then we've got action teams that are already in motion and doing work, but we can tell you what comes next for each one of those teams. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah. Okay. Yes, we can do that.
I had 2 more things I wanted to ask about. one is for the superintendent and then one's for Dick. The superintendent, one of the things that was highlighted in terms of what some of the other districts are doing is either small school programs or small schools for students who are dealing with suspensions or expulsions. And I know we've had that conversation in the past, that it seems like a suspension or expulsion is the exact opposite of what you want to do for a child who's struggling. But I don't know that we've taken it farther than that, and I'm curious if there's any, as I'm seeing other districts doing that, again, I'd love to hear more about what success they're having with those programs, and whether that would be something we would consider at some point.
So yes, we can put that on, because part of what we've put on here is saying, let's have teams be able to go and visit good, successful practices in other districts. And we'll let you know when we set those up in case you're wanting to go along on any of those.
Great, that'd be great.
And we actually do have the DESK program, which is our own in-school suspension and expulsion program. So we have an example of it. And as you know, our other successful practice has been restorative justice, which we've, in the budget this year, looked to expand the number of schools that are using that practice. So, but yes, we'll go visit other districts.
Which leads me into a question for you, if you can give us some advice on this. One of your recommendations is to conduct additional research and evaluation in order to obtain more complete understanding of the impact of existing supports for at-risk students. When you're a district that's doing so many different interventions and so many different supports at, variety of levels, pre-K through 12, how do you isolate one or two or three and get that information? I mean, I know sometimes you can do a control group and sometimes not. Do you have any advice for us on even how to go about that?
It would seem to me that you'd want to choose 3 or 4 that have the most, that are used most frequently, that have the most students that are involved in it, as opposed to a small number. So the greater number of students that participate in a particular intervention, it might give you better results, or you get data that might be more reliable. And I know there are, if you look at the number of kinds of interventions we do, it would be pages probably, and some of them have small numbers, but you'd want to pick those that have the larger numbers. I would probably want to pick those that may connect to some of the things that you feel most strongly about, that attach to the goals that you're trying to achieve, those goals that are most important to you, those that have the most potential impact on your milestones. Other than that, that's just off the top of my head.
See, and I'd even say some of what we did during high school system design was try and identify where the successful practices were, and last year was the first year of really implementing freshman academies. I mean, we had numbers of things we said, okay, here, these are being successful in some schools, can we replicate those across the system? So we're a short way into trying to say, can we get, how do we do that across the whole, double blocking of classes, using Avid as a strategy to get an on-ramp.
Things we're doing.
Yeah, but we did some that we then did replicate across the system, or put across the entire system, but we're early in implementation, so.
And there's some practices that we use that have actually been shown in academic studies to be effective. So that we wouldn't necessarily have to evaluate that.
Right.
This is an effective practice. It's been shown by a bunch of others. Some real evaluation of is expensive and it takes a long time, and there's just so much you can do. So a real thorough evaluation with control groups probably would not be practical. So I would also urge for practical evaluation rather than extensive year-long studies.
So I will say the other thing we are doing as part of Successful Schools Framework is looking at our own data and what schools are getting the results we're looking for. So like the Advanced Scholars Program at Franklin, where we were getting really outstanding success, is a program we will probably look to replicate, just because the kind of success we were getting in the school that has implemented it most deeply. So like I think that, and that's some of what we're doing across the whole system, is where are we getting the outcomes we're looking for, and how do we look at those practices and see if they're replicable.
The academic priority system that we have is a,
Yes.
I can't say enough, it's a noteworthy system. It
Yeah.
really is powerful.
Yep.
It has really good information in it.
Yep.
And if it's used fully to the extent we can, it's a very useful tool to see change and improvement.
I'd just add one other piece about successful programs, and that being career technical education. Benson has a very high graduation rate. One of the studies that you cite in your report has students saying that opportunities for real-world learning to make the classroom more relevant. 81% of students said that would be something that would have held them in school if they had more of that. So I think we need to really continue to think about what we're doing for our students in career technical education, both at the high school level and again, down into the middle schools.
And I would just say that I think that all of this also is a testament to the investments that we currently have in our Sun schools and our partnership with SEI in terms of long-term mentorship and academic coaching, our step-up after-school tutoring and mentorship. So those are all places where we have really close alignment with these most promising practices and where we have strong data demonstrating that they're having a big impact.
So just as a small aside, I was going to ask if the co-chairs or Dick, if you have sent a copy of this to the districts that you all talked to, because I would think it would be really great for them to be able to read this as well.
I promised I would send it to them too.
Good. And will you send it to their school board members too?
I'd be happy to.
Please.
Dr. Bill?
Mr. Tracy, thank you very much
You're welcome.
for this study. What I'm about to say doesn't reflect on you or the study necessarily. But when I see these kinds of studies, I have a lot of trouble with trying to figure out what we're trying to do. We're building on a foundation that doesn't seem to want to exist. And so we end up making these responses to errors that we've previously made without identifying those errors at least and thinking about them and working with them. For instance, 47% of the kids say their classes were not interesting. Well, we're in charge of those classes and they're not interesting. And one of the reasons they're not is because we keep moving in directions that don't make those classes interesting. Social psychology, which isn't mentioned at all in here, talks about in order to have your employees do their best job, you want a large amount of autonomy. And trying to do the accountability business makes them do often a worse job instead of a better job. That's a fairly solid social psychology maxim, I guess. So from my point of view, what we want to do is create more autonomy for teachers and have them make more interesting classes. And that comes down to what Pam talked about the opportunities for real-world learning. And one of the things that seems to me that we haven't done, and that wasn't addressed in here, was we haven't, as a district, spelled out what we want to do educationally. And I hope as we move along, because that's something we're starting to look at, I think. What was that thing we talked about a couple days ago? And I asked you where we did it and I had it wrong. You said, no, that's in the future. What was the name of that program? The one about how we're going to look at our education itself?
What we're doing, our visioning process?
Yeah, the visioning process. Well, if we don't do that, we're going to continue to do all these other things in response. For instance, if you go back to the four, I'll just take these section by section, the four research findings, why students drop out, one, behavior. Well, that would mean to me that we would try to make sure, if you tied that in with this idea where they talk about had too much freedom, that we would want to make sure our schools were solid behaviorally. And we went to PBIS, and that's what we're having, I think for me, that's where I'm having trouble. We go to PBIS, which is a system, it's a response. We should have as a value that we have engaging classrooms where kids are actually engaged in the work, and that should be our value, and that's the value we should be communicating in order to build upon, instead of going to a system that maybe might work or not, but we don't have the value, and I don't see that here. The second one is school performance, and you have low achievement. But achievement, are you using the word achievement as a testing, or achievement as classroom achievement, or both? Hopefully it would be both, but we think almost, because since you can't measure that classroom achievement very easily, we have a tendency to move to the other. But really, the classroom itself, the interesting and the kids wanting to do well in the classroom would seem to me to be a much more sensible approach. None of that shows up in your recommendations nor in the superintendent's recommendations that I can find. Then we talk about the poor attendance. Well, kids don't want to go if it's boring and rotten school. Of course they don't want to go to school. I can remember lots of kids I had in middle school in Portland, when I taught in the middle school in the 1990s in Portland, and no, they didn't like school. They're dropping out in middle school, I guarantee it. They weren't dropping out the door. They used to say, oh, I'm going to drop out. And I said, well, there's the door, go down. Turn left, go down the stairs, and you're out. And they were always, they would threaten to drop out. But the point was really that we did not have interesting stuff. If you go across the river to Vancouver, and I noticed you didn't pick up Vancouver in your stop, but if you go across the river to Vancouver, it's unbelievable what they have in their middle schools. If you go just out to David Douglas, they have way more activities and things. Now, we do some things where we have some nice things that go on, the Sun School, but we don't have the tie-in, we don't have the marching band that has 70 kids involved in it. And we don't have the plays going on, and we don't have those things which we could begin to work in, then we don't. We don't have the sports stuff. And we don't look at that. We look at, instead of laying out a foundation for good schools, we have a tendency to look at the practices which have been successful someplace else. We're looking at their little things instead of laying out this. And that bothers me that we don't talk about that, because it has a huge effect on attendance. And then the last one's the family background. It's the same thing. Even if you have your schools work well, you have to do those conditions that help kids come from the family background into the school. And if they have a rough family background or have difficult things, then you got to be able to work with them. I really like the Hillsborough stuff. I think that what they're doing out there seems to make a lot of sense to me. It would make sense all the way down. Very expensive, I would assume, and pretty hard to do, but we would have to shift things to do that instead of worrying about all testing, say, Common Core, which is what the state is pushing us in those directions. We should be worrying about, how's this kid doing? And we have the early part of that. We have the early warning system going, but we're not really, doesn't appear to be following through there as well as we need to do that. And so for me, that stuff's more important than what are they doing out at Clackamas. They may be doing some nice things, and I like borrowing those things, but we don't have the foundation. And what we need to do, I think, to lay the foundation is to lay out what it is we really believe we want to do educationally. We're not doing that now. We took the Common Core curriculum, K through 3, no K through 3 teachers involved in the entire thing, and we bought it as a state and bought it as a district. So we are now going to use the standards that, for our district, that not one K through 3 teacher was involved in. And we didn't run them through the K through 3 teachers in our district to ask them about it either. And so, of course, we're going to have problems when we approach it that way. And I'd just like to see us move different in looking at Superintendent Smith's recommendations. I don't see what I'm talking about at all in here. I see a lot of neat stuff, but it's not what I'm talking about. And I think we have a tendency to go that direction often. And it doesn't make sense to me that that's the way we want to go. I would say some things that we might want to do, and you might suggest engagement in school. So we actually engage the kids as opposed to saying we're supporting their unengagement. Since they're not engaged, we're going to support the fact that they're not engaged as opposed to engaging them. So our supports for middle school kids are supports built around academics, not built around engaging them in school. The curriculum itself, we need to look at making it much more interesting than it is, including things that, like Pam talked about, what happened to the shop and the art. We could put a lot of that stuff back in the middle school. And the connections with staff, which are critical for kids, the mentoring, but education has a real problem with that right now. It's hard for staff to get connected to kids because of the child molestation problems and stuff. And we need to look at that and see what can we do there to connect up better. More help in transforming from home to school we need. And the other one is we need kind of more orderly classrooms and orderly schools. And so all those things, I'd look at those things really way more than the other things necessarily, though I don't have any problem with the other things. And here's my question. Poor Greg over there is just trying not to interrupt me. So what do you think of what I just said?
I only have a few seconds. You said a lot, and I don't know if I have a frame of reference to answer any question at this point. So I'm going to say that most of what you've talked about is a little bit out of the scope of this report. Not to say they weren't.
Yes, that was
interesting
my point.
ideas, but they were out of what the objectives of this report. So I don't have a lot of response to some of the comments because I don't know the answers.
Any other comments or questions?
I'd just like to say thank you, Mr. Tracy. I was really impressed with the report, and I'd like to echo some of our earlier sentiments about how I'm really excited to see the next steps and how we use this knowledge we've gained to implement it into our system. I also think it's really important to note last spring we had the budget listening session for students at Roosevelt, and a few of the positive things that you talked about, like extracurriculars, individualized support programs, CTE, and support in middle school, were all things that were mentioned at that student listening session. So these aren't, things that are out of kids' minds. They're definitely thinking about it a lot, and so I think it's just
Thank you so much for reminding us about that.
Yeah.
And I think was that the first time we had done that? Yeah, okay, because that was just great, so we need to keep that up.
No, we did 2 last year, though,
Yeah,
instead of just
yeah.
1, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Sure.
Just going on what Andrew said, Benson works. The dropout rate's low there. And the reason, in my opinion, that it is that those kids are engaged in what they're doing. So if you can engage kids, it makes a huge difference.
Great. Mr. Tracy, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the report.
You're very welcome.
As you said, we'll get that up on our website. It sounds like we'll be sending it back to the districts that you worked, and I'd like to
Absolutely,
thank the
I will.
districts for talking with us so that we
I
could
will
have
do
some
that.
context.
Yeah, I think they're going to love to read this.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will just remind, as Mr. Tracy's leaving, that Mr. Tracy is an independent contractor with the school district, specifically with the Board of Education. He is not a PPS employee. He works on our behalf, and he works at the scope and our direction. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on, we're going to move on to the Equity Implementation Plan update. Tonight, we're going to receive the progress report on our Equity Implementation Plan. Superintendent Smith, will you introduce this item?
I will, and it's my pleasure to introduce Lorenzo Poe, who's our Chief Equity Officer, and Janine Fukuda, who is the Project Manager in the Equity Office.
Good evening, Chair Bilal, Board Member, Superintendent Smith, Lorenzo Poe, Chief Equity Officer and Partnership Director. The Racial Education Equity Policy required the superintendent to semi-annually update the progress of the equity plans to the board. Tonight, we're presenting to you the update on the 2012-13 annual plan. In doing so, we do want to highlight several areas of positive progress and where we are continuing to modify our plan so that we can get to the point of progress that we all desire. Excuse me. We also want to highlight tonight 2 areas of important note of the work that the equity program has done for the district, and really looking at how we utilized equity in budgeting. And we also want to highlight how the equity work is moving in our special ed department and the kind of gains and outcomes they're seeing. We also want to be mindful that while we only have a limited time for our update, if there's those areas by which you really want to go deeper in the discussion or around the plan, we'll be happy to make time for that to occur. So we do know and understand the time is limited tonight, and we want to recognize that. I also want to reiterate that the Office of Equity and Partnership is charged with leading and supporting the district cultural change as we move to a culture of inclusivity and equity. And we believe that that is carried out by policy, by the practices, and the workforce development the district undertakes. In 2013, a couple of significant policy initiatives that were passed was the Contracting for Equity, which reflects the district's commitment to include MWSBs in the work of the district, in particular around our bond work. And in June, we passed our affirmative action policy that will again begin to show a level of transparency as we begin to move our workforce to one that closely mirrors the populations that we serve, and in fact bring us closer to the aspiration and goal of the State of Oregon's Minority Teachers Act. We have seen several significant practices, one of which the board and the central leadership that took training and use of the equity lens. Board members began to, after training, utilize the lens as a way to do a cursory review and analysis of those things that are equitable or where inequities might exist and things that are being talked about and proposed, and triggering a place where we really might want to address those inequities and how we may be able to mitigate them. We also, as you will hear a little more later, use the equity lens in budgeting, which is one of the things that the board clearly said to us as a district last year. You really wanted to see how we, in fact, were employing the equity lens in how we're budgeting. Again, a number of the equity lens tools are utilized in how we are contracting, looking at contracting with, including our MWBSs and the district's business. And in workforce development, clearly looking at how we transform the workforce again to mirror the populations that we serve. 48% of new building administrators hired this past year were administrators of color. 38% of our new hires were bilingual. Our central office equity teams have created 10 central departments that have created equity teams. We've spent over 50 training sessions where in fact the work in the leadership of central office has began to take the work deeper and deeper into central operations. We have to align the work that we're doing around equity with what is going on in our schools so that we in fact have a culture that is equitable across the district. You have heard during the previous year in cluster presentations how our buildings are successfully integrating equity into their buildings. You have heard of their successes as principals talked about the work they're doing around equity and how they're utilizing it. You've also heard of some of their challenges, so you have that as a backdrop. We are clearly excited about the direction of our work. We recognize that there's still much to be done. We also understand that when you're doing cultural change in an organization, that it is sometimes messy, it is sometimes slow, and it's sometimes uneven. But again, we're excited about it, and we want to present to you our annual plan so you'll get a feel for the progress. We want you to hear from 2 areas where the work is taking hold, and then we'll open up for questions. With that, I'd like Janine Fukuda to walk you through the annual plan document that was submitted to you.
Good evening. So in your board packet, you received a copy of our annual progress report, which summarizes all of the year-end progress towards our 2012 to 13 goals. For each of the 18 priority strategies that were identified in the 5-year equity plan, each of the departments identified specific actions to focus on for the 2012-13 year. And so progress is described, you'll see it's the second to the last column, and is indicated by either green, yellow, or red, where green indicates on track, yellow indicates on track with considerations, and red indicates behind schedule. We are now in the process of creating the annual plan for the 2013-14 year, and we'll continue to monitor progress this coming year. At the end of our presentation, we'll respond to any questions you have, but before that, I'd like to first turn it over to David Wine, our Deputy CFO, and also then to Mary Pearson, our Director of Special Education, who's going to tell you a little bit about their equity work this year.
Co-Chair Bilal, Board Members, Superintendent Smith, David Wine, Deputy CFO and Budget Director. So our racial education equity policy makes two references to differentiation of resources. And I think we were challenged 15 months ago when we presented the budget for 2012-13 with folks asking us to do a better job of demonstrating how that differentiation of resources actually played out in practice in the budget. So this year, as we were working on the development of the budget for 2013-14, which I'm still struggling to call this year, but it is this year, we did a couple of things. Many of you will remember that when we're developing the budget, we've got parallel streams of work going on. We have the district staffing team that's looking at the staffing ratios and the staffing in schools. And we have another team that looks at what we're doing for more centrally allocated resources. In the case of the district staffing team, what we did this year was early on in that process, we had folks trained in the use of the racial equity lens, and that informed the discussions that we had as part of that process. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. And then on the other side, where we were looking at the centrally allocated resources, we developed a process that we talked about when we were proposing and presenting the budget to you, called the Budget Leadership Team, which was central office leadership. And we asked all of the budget holders to prepare a budget submission that talked about the work that their groups did. We asked them to take a look at a hypothetical 5% budget reduction. And specifically what we did in the context of equity, we asked each of those submitters, using a district-wide racial equity lens, please describe the impact of that 5% reduction on the service that you provide. So when we came together as budget leadership team, we were able to look at the impact of those services and a change in that funding level on different racial groups. And we used that information to help inform the budget. So how did that translate into any difference and any kind of differentiation of resources? As far as the district staffing team is concerned, you'll recall that in this year's budget, we have an equity allocation where 8% of the budget is allocated based on either 4% is allocated based on socioeconomic status, but what's new this year is 4% is allocated on a ratio that we called combined underserved, which is a state-defined ratio that includes the 4 historically underserved racial groups: special education, English language learners, and free and reduced lunch percentages. So we fundamentally changed that allocation formula to make race and other underserved criteria a portion of how we allocated money to school staffing. And on the central office side, I should back up and say also during the budget development process, we met a number of times as a budget team with the Coalition of Communities of Color to outline what the budget process was going to be, to review the forecast for our revenue and our overall budget situation. And so we had a continuing dialogue with that group and the organizations they represent. So on the school staffing side, it was the staffing formula change that I mentioned. And again, on the centrally allocated resources, there were a number of things that the superintendent referenced in the budget message that were a direct reflection of the conversations that were provoked by that equity lens question. So in no particular order, we included funding for policy development work and to support the affirmative action policy. When we were struggling to deal with reductions in federal funding in Title I, we ensured the general fund funded a staff program that supports young men of color in the Roosevelt cluster. We made sure that there was funding to support the alignment of the enrollment and transfer policy with the district's racial education equity policy. In response to the overrepresentation and exclusion in student discipline, we provided funds for a contract for a third-party hearings officer to calibrate for consistency. We changed the way that we administer TAG resources to ensure equity of access across schools. We added some money to expand the restorative justice investment that you heard about, and we maintained our investment in central family engagement staff and capacity to contract with culturally specific community-based organizations. So those changes were a direct reflection of that equity work in the budget. And I think the fact that as part of the budget process we heard public testimony from the coalition is a reflection of at least a change in the nature of that relationship as well.
Okay. Can I get the... Good evening, board members and Superintendent Smith. We're very excited to be here, and especially with celebrating some success in the special education department. And I wanted to start by just saying, although we are headed in a trajectory that is positive, that we're really happy about, we are by no means there yet, but it's good to be here celebrating. So I wanted to start with our mission statement. We started the beginning of last year, building on the great work that the previous director, Robert Ford, did. We worked as a team and did some vetting with our community and parents and came up with, I think, a very strong mission statement that we are using to drive and be the foundation of our work. And this is something that we revisit in everything that we do. The next thing that we did was we made a very conscious effort to align our work and our practices with the rest of the district and with the strategic framework of the rest of the district. So really pulling out in those individual areas what that means for kids with special needs. We also started out with really making a concerted effort to address some of these things through that strategic framework and through our mission statement. So some of the work that we did this year is we started sort of an equity PLC with our school psychologists, our early childhood team who does initial eligibilities for special education for young children, birth to 5, our autism specialists, our TOSAs, and really exploring some of the bias, the cultural bias around initial identification of special education. We also did a rollout, the beginning rollout of our patterns of strengths and weaknesses, which is a way of identifying students with learning disabilities that really looks at data and having to demonstrate appropriate instruction rather than looking at a deficit model. And along with that was looking at really purchasing and adopting some culturally relevant assessment tools and making sure that we were, using an equity lens when looking at that and looking at language development, ESL and things like that. The other thing that we started this last year is working collaboratively with principals to look at their building data and develop building support plans. So our program administrators having a plan that they've developed with a principal around what kind of support they would like to see in their building in order to move some of these issues forward. So looking at their initial eligibilities and discipline data, and if they're really making a concerted effort to target certain things. We also have what's called the Intervention Resource Team, which has been it's actually been a process that we've used for the last couple of years, but we really worked to make that process a little more collaborative this year, but that is essentially if a team wants to move a child to a more restrictive setting, so to a focus class or a special school, they come to this team and they present data, and we talk together about, is there any other supports that we can put in place, or is there any other way we can support the team to keep the student in a less restrictive setting? But what this has done is it's really sort of increased the rigor of the interventions and the data that they're coming to this team to present, and it's really developed into much more of a collaborative process between our department, the supports that we have, and buildings. The other thing that we started rolling out last year is standards-based IEPs, so writing our IEPs that are aligned with the Common Core and state standards. And this is a new thing for our special ed staff, so last year we laid down the framework for that, and that will continue to roll out will be fully rolled out this school year. The other thing, we actually have started our program administrators really creating a culture of data. So using our administrative meetings to look at data and really develop professional learning communities around that. We have also done the same thing with our behavior intervention classrooms and have seen some tremendous shift in the amount of time that kids actually spend in those classrooms. So we have several celebrations across the district where kids that are actually in the behavior-focused classrooms are getting the majority of their support in a gen ed class with the support of the behavior classroom. So they're really having more access to core instruction. And this was a very, when you start putting a light on something and you start celebrating, it just starts to snowball, and that's definitely what has happened there. I think the other thing that we're making a huge effort in engaging our parent community and our just the larger community. So we've done a lot of work with our parent advisory group last year, and we'll continue to do that and reaching more out to other community organizations. So these are just some of the data points that we're here to celebrate. In looking at new special education eligibilities, we want to decrease that, especially in our ESL population, and making sure that we're identifying kids that truly have a disability and not students that have that are learning another language. So we've seen a decrease, slight increase or decrease in Asian students, slight decrease in our African American population and Native American populations. I think another place that we're celebrating is federal placement, so looking at the percentage of time that students are actually removed from core instruction. And so this area that we're looking at is students who spend 80% of their day or more in core instruction instead of in a special education classroom. And we've seen some real movement there as well in those ethnic groups. Probably the biggest celebration is our discipline data. We're very happy about this. We were selected for a significant disproportionality for the last couple of years, and we're no longer selected for significant disproportionality. It was specifically around our African American population. But we're seeing movement across the board as far as, and what this is looking at is students who were removed for 10 or more days in a school year, students with disabilities that are 10 or more days. So if you look at our African American population, went from 44 students to 16, which is pretty amazing. We've seen decreases also, big decreases with our white population, and I think our Native American population is a good celebration there too. So, yep, and that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're available to answer any questions you might have either from the document or if there's areas of which around the equity work that you would like to go deeper, we'll entertain that and figure out how to make sure that we get that to you.
A lot of nice stuff here in this document.
Thank you.
Particularly around adults. I'm curious of the directions that we're going for kids in the equity stuff. I mean, as a district, because I'm new to this, so have we laid out, what's the long-range plan for dealing with actually getting things down into the classroom? I mean, like cultural curriculum things, stuff like that. That's my first question.
Well, first,
do we have a plan for that?
Well, we're looking at how you begin to develop what becomes student-specific curriculum that can be taught into schools. There are some cooperations with PSU and others who are teaching culturally relevant curriculum. Our school strategy really is culturally relevant strategies around teaching. So that's about kids in school.
Right, yeah.
Our whole Courageous Conversation work really is about preparing adults to help kids in school. In order to do that, we believe you have to take the entire district under a cultural transformation, all but one thing in mind, and that's about helping kids and moving it all down to the classroom.
So, what about, are we teaching children to not be racist?
Well, I don't think
I mean,
we have a
are we
specific...
teaching children about their cultural history, say, or, Black history,
I couldn't
Latino
tell
history?
you around the specific curriculum. Maybe Sue-Ann could do that, but my hope would be that at some point we are really talking to kids about cultural history.
Probably take that as a no.
Yeah. I wouldn't take it as a no, take it as that I don't have the specifics on that, but I would hope that
Somebody
we
does.
are. So
Who
Sue-Ann could talk
would
about
have
that.
the specifics on that?
So I will say, like, as Lorenzo just said, part of what we're doing is really looking at impacting the culture of adults and how
Yeah,
we
right.
work with
Yeah,
kids.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
is the main
yeah,
point.
I don't have any problem with that.
However, we have had, like Franklin High School has a class that has taken it to students, and actually leadership students who are deeply in the work. I know elementary schools that actually are doing the Courageous Conversations, and that's going to be more school to school based on individual teachers' development of the curriculum and taking it to students. So our emphasis at this point as a whole district is about the adults and the ways in which we work with kids and the ways in which, like as you just saw with special education, how are we intentionally serving every single one of our students? So that is the emphasis of this at this point. But yes, it is reaching students in terms of curricular focus in some places.
Areas.
Yeah.
That's about what I thought. The ELL stuff is a little different. You got the kids from Somalia, say. How does that play into the equity work that we're doing? In other words, if you have a kid from Somalia, are we dealing with teachers and teaching them how to deal with culturally relevant things for various different cultural groups throughout the school district? In other words, if a kid's from, I don't know, he can go from the Ukraine, even though they've been around for a long time, the Ukraine, but I mean, do we have any programs that are directed at that part of the equity stuff?
I'm not aware of that level of specificity. But we do, however, engage with our community partners, a number who from those ethnic communities. They help integrate their support and assistance as we help kids through their acculturation and understanding their culture, and particularly in their transition to this country.
Could you give me one example of that?
We work with ERICO, who works with our African refugee community, who supports us in schools and making sure parents are connected, kids are beginning to interact from a cultural paradigm that's important to them.
Do we centralize? Do we have that centralized? Say, if you have kids in 5 different schools, do we somehow work with that group to deal with all the kids in those different schools? Because this is real interesting. This is real. I want to kind of go this direction in the next year.
We do administer essential contracts. We're asking for our providers to work with broad-based communities. Those are referred in partnership with our family engagement and in partnership with schools and all our partners. So to say we have one specific place, I'm sure in some cases that's how they deliver the service. Our role is to make that available into multicultural areas, and that's what we do.
So there's nothing really that goes directly out to teachers that says, okay, this kid's from, we're going to get kids from Mali, probably, down the line here. We don't have things that go out and say, if you got a kid from Mali, this is some cultural relevant information to help you deal with these children in the classroom.
What we do is to
we do
work to
anything?
make sure that the information in our schools, to have the information in our schools of what our contract providers provide. So if they have a particular need, they would know how to access and connect those students to that particular service.
So I'm wondering at this point if there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of what this work is about. It's not us, I don't understand this work to be, now we're going to be culturally relevant, and that means Latino kids are going to learn about Latino culture. That might be a part of it, but it's reflecting on our institutional and or professional biases that, like anybody who's had kids, I think, can look at this and say, you know, I'm going to use this example with my kid, and then you realize that they don't have a context for that example that you were just about to do because they're not old enough. And so when I hear about teachers reflecting on this or our departments reflecting on it, it's about what are the things, what are the assumptions we make that somebody would understand or walk into or presume that might actually wind up putting us in crosshairs of actually serving a student or a family in the right way. I think that's kind of, so it's not whether the student's from Mali or you've used examples of Syria or China or wherever they come from. It's about how do we ensure our assumptions, our racial background, our ethnicity, our assumptions don't get in the way of us effectively working with that student.
Could I ask a question of the special ed director? Or you want to wait?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. On where the numbers dropped on the kids who were expelled, those were expulsions, right?
Mm-hmm. That's suspensions for more than 10 days, so it could be.
Oh, suspensions for more than 10 days. Okay, great, that's right. What did we do differently that caused that, do you think?
I think a variety of things.
Steps we took.
I think the equity work and the continued focus on the equity work is making people more aware. So more aware of how maybe a student from a different background or a racial background might present differently in a classroom. So I believe that teachers are adjusting their instruction and the way that they interact or support students. So I think part of it is just the continued focus on that, and it's starting to take hold, and so people are doing things differently. I think there's been sort of a paradigm shift in the district around students, and it's more about students. And so how can I, as a teacher, change what I'm doing to meet the needs of my students? And I think that building administrators are driving that message, and so it's slowly starting to sort of take hold. So I really believe that that's part of it. There was also part of this a sanction, so we had to divert 15% of our IDEA budget to prevention. So there was that was given to student services by way of positive behavior support, TOSAs, or specialists, behavior specialists. So that work was being done in the front end, so teaching buildings and teachers the strategies that they need to create more of a student-focused, positive behavior support focus. So
thank you.
Let's hope that
Can
it's
I
working.
just add on too? I mean, I've just a sense that special ed and English language learning department both are more literally at the table, you know, and it's no longer, we're trying to change the culture from those kids over there that are someone else's responsibility too. This is, all kids are all of our kids, and that also gets back to kind of the core point of the equity work of that every adult in the district owns and believes in every child. So, I mean, that's really where we're headed, and so it's just so encouraging to
Yeah.
see the progress that you're making and kind of both the spotlight on where we're falling short, but also really some significant gains, so it's exciting.
And I would say just to the part, OTL as a group working together is huge. I
The
mean,
Office
we
of
can't
Teaching
take
and Learning.
credit. It's not like we're doing this in a vacuum. I think that we're really working together to make this happen. So.
Thank you.
Very quick question. Lorenzo, I think you mentioned that and Sean, this might be a question for you. Of the principals that we've hired new for next year, for this year, 48% are principals of color and 38% of those are bilingual. That's amazing. It's really exciting.
New hire administrators, so that's
Right.
both principals and
it's not just
assistant
principals,
principals
it's
and vice
principals and
principals. But
administrators.
all of our building administrators, yeah, that was the
That's
data.
amazing work.
Yeah.
And my question, and I don't know if we have it yet, is whether we have a figure for our teachers and for classified, new teachers and new classified, and if we have those kind of numbers, and if we would see some similar data.
I'm not aware.
We don't yet.
We can get that for you.
You have the substitute pool data in here. Like, we realized at an earlier moment in time that we end up hiring 40% of teachers out of our substitute pool, and we've increased steadily every year the number of substitutes who are substitutes of color or bilingual, which is great. Sean Murray.
Good evening, board members. We're still in the process of hiring, so we still are collecting that information, so we don't have a final count yet as far as with our teachers.
Because it's clearly a focus with hiring teachers and other staff as well.
Correct.
Great. That's exciting. I look forward to hearing that.
Actually, I'm going to tell you this, because the substitute pool, 19% were teachers of color, which was an increase of 7% more diversity in this year's subpool than last year's subpool. And then we have a cohort of 55 teachers who are working for their ESOL endorsement this year. Was one of our goals was really to increase the number of teachers who had the ESOL endorsement. So we've got measures on a number of fronts that are moving.
And just in general, the hiring piece was just so exciting. Really, I mean, the Portland Teachers Project, did it say we had 9 of 10?
And yes, of the Portland Teacher Project graduates this year, we hired 9 of the 10 graduates with early letters. So I'm just going to say that was our other attempt, was doing early letters of intent. Yep.
That's really exciting.
HR is doing a tremendous job.
They're doing a tremendous
It's been a
job.
team effort, but when you see the kind of focus and attention can drive results, it's exciting.
I'll just call out, there's so many, I guess overall, I really appreciate, this is a very large document, but it's really great. I really appreciate the level of detail that's in here, so it both, kind of moves you through without overwhelming you with data, but really is down to the level of who is the lead staff person who owns this and what progress. There's a few places where I would have liked to have seen a little more specificity in the data. Probably, and I know that this is on our yearly priority work plan, so that we'll be hearing again. We'll probably be doing more in-depth deep dives on some of these pieces. Also the discipline in particular, waiting to see where we are with that. So that's great. But just in general, you can kind of feel through reading this just how, as you were saying, that it's getting embedded in our culture throughout the district. And while there obviously still is a lot of that needs to happen, the feeling of momentum is really palpable just in reading this document. So it's really appreciate that. Things like the tag identification, although sadly for all our tag students, I wish we had the resources to provide them with it. But to reduce the disproportionality for the identification is great work. And there's also a number of pieces in here, in addition to maybe just a few more data points being added, where there's really, it gets back to the piece we always come to, the fidelity of implementation. Yes. So the sheltered instruction, how are we making sure that it's being done effectively, and so on and so forth. Okay. The Parent Academy, what's the feedback we're getting from the parents who participate, all those pieces. And I know that going into next year's budgeting process, again, with an equity lens, we'll be wanting to hear about the effectiveness.
We'll take a deeper look for you and see what we can get.
Yeah, but again, just to everybody in the entire district, just really appreciate the sustained effort and the great work that's going on.
And I know I share this with my colleagues in the district, how important it is that you as a board has really assumed the leadership role. It truly makes a difference when the community and the district see that the leadership at all levels of this district is supportive of the work and us moving the work. And the feeling in the district really is one of, this is all of our work. We know we haven't gotten there, so we're cautious about tooting our horns.
Right.
But there are places where it really feels good. We're seeing some results. Places where we know we got a lot of work to do and people are rolling up their sleeves to do their work. But thank you too.
Yeah. And just for me personally, you know, having 2 years left on the board, it's so vital to me that this initiative, this work gets embedded truly in the district, that it isn't just a passing thing. So figuring out ways that we can make sure that this is sustainable and permanent as boards come and go is really, really important.
Yeah.
Question just relates to the audit. These other districts that we looked at in terms of performance, do they have a program like this, or are they doing things different than we are in this regard? Or are we leading the charge?
I can't speak to all of them. I know the Seattle School District is doing an equity initiative. They've come down and talked to us. They've visited us. I know a number of the state schools that are part of our state network are doing this kind of work. So a number of them, yes, they are involved in this kind of work.
I just had a couple of questions. Some of it's just a request, again, when you come back for data. There are a couple of times where we reference year-end intended outcomes in relative rates. But then when we see progress, they're in percentages of subgroups or something, and that it just makes it hard to know where we're at. There are a couple of places where baseline metrics are left empty. That even if they're not technically September 2012 because we didn't have them, at some point it'd be helpful to have baseline metrics.
Okay.
And then there was one place where I was a little confused that on, and this might be really more specific than you're ready to jump into, but on page 9 in our September progress, we talk about how we're seeing anecdotal feedback from participants showing positive impact on expulsionary discipline. But previously on page, so just in case you wonder if we read all the stuff you give us.
No, I have no doubt about that.
Previously on page 6, when we look at September 2013 progress, we indicate that we're disappointed because we're making better improvements with students who are white than we are with the students of color. And so those seem contradicting messages to me, but maybe I'm not understanding something.
I think on page 9, that comment is talking specifically at sort of different schools that are showing specific results versus the comments on page 6 are more of a system-wide.
Okay.
And I think specifically around the expulsionary discipline, I think we're coming back next month to do a in-depth report, and we can clarify that.
Helps. So where we've
those
invested
pieces.
we're making progress there.
Yes.
But system-wide, we're still struggling.
Yeah.
And the last question I had was, there's a data point in here that talks a little bit about ESL student enrollment in dual language program represents at K-level 50% native language speakers. It's on page 4, teaching and learning priority strategy 4. And I was curious if, I'm assuming we're taking that as a system-wide, as a district-wide, and I'd be curious if you ever pull that out school by school. What it reminds me of is a little bit of attendance data where your average daily attendance is fantastic, but some schools are really good and some schools are really struggling with that. Do we have that data? Are we going to?
We do have that data, and we could share that with you if you're interested.
Do you know whether or not that seems to be the case at some schools?
So there is some difference, but it depends on the type of program because we have different dual language programs in the system. And I think that they came to you with that about 6 months ago, explaining the differences in programming. But yes, they are at different levels, and the goal is to get.
That's actually what made me think about it, is that I knew some schools seem to be under-enrolled in native, and I just want to make sure we don't. Right, we don't want to lose that. So, other questions, thoughts?
And actually, I just wanted to appreciate Lorenzo's leadership and Janine as the assistant director for her perseverance in helping us all learn to use a tool like this, because as you know, this is a really different behavior for this organization, and just really, because Janine and this team is really working on rolling up data and metrics from numbers of departments who are really trying to articulate what is the thing that's really going to, is the thing that is the right thing to be measuring, and then figuring out how we're measuring it appropriately. So this very streamlined document is actually a tremendous amount of fine-tuning to get to what we've got at this point, and it's really us learning how to do a 5-year plan that means something, and where we really can watch our progress. So I just want to say thank you to both of you for your work on making this happen.
Indeed, thank you very much. We're going to now move on to our Educational Specifications Facilities Vision Draft Resolution discussion. Our Office of School Modernization has begun a process to envision the future of education facilities and develop educational standards and specifications for all district school buildings. Superintendent Smith, can you provide us a little more?
I can. I will introduce Paul Cathcart, who will introduce our guests to present our visioning report.
And thank you to everybody who's here to join in the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Belisle, Directors, Superintendent Smith. My name is Paul Cathcart, I'm a Project Manager in Facilities and Asset Management. It's good to be here this evening. Find my presentation this evening. I'm here this evening to give you a presentation of the Education Facilities Vision developed as part of the Educational Specifications Project that's been ongoing since earlier this year. We will be back before you on September 11th for your consideration of a resolution to adopt the vision document. So we're just presenting tonight.
I don't want to interrupt, but that meeting's been moved to September 9th.
Okay. I think we'll be back on September 9th. Thanks for the clarification. Joining me this evening is the consultant team, John Weeks, partner with Dow IBI Group Architects, and Nancy Hamilton of Nancy Hamilton Consulting, who've helped us put together this process and have done great work in pulling together the vision process and working with constituents in the development of specifications. Dow is a local architectural firm specializing in K-12 schools and has a portfolio around the world, so they do local work in schools all over the world. Nancy's a longtime school advocate in the background in local and state governments, and she, some of you may remember, shared our long-range facility planning process last year. So John and Nancy are going to do the bulk of the presenting this evening, but I want to give you a quick overview of the process that we've all been privileged to be a part of this spring as we listen to a variety of groups and organizations and individuals and their desires for the future of our schools and buildings and the development of the vision that we'll talk about tonight. And I think I can speak for everybody who's been part of this project and everybody who's been involved in the conversations that we're thankful to the board for the opportunity to have these conversations. It's been really interesting work and meaningful work. So before I give you a quick overview, on the right is the vision statement that's found on page 1 of the vision document. I just want to go through this quickly, because I think it summarizes a lot that we've heard in the last few months. So Portland Public Schools seeks to be the best urban school district in this country. In the 21st century, learning takes place everywhere, all the time, and buildings play a critical supporting role in ensuring all of our students emerge as lifelong learners ready for the world that awaits them. We seek to create learning environments that nurture, inspire, and challenge all students, regardless of race or class. We aspire to provide safe, healthy, accessible school environments that foster productive relationships for all children, families, staff, and community partners. So let me give you a little background on the project overall. The development of educational specifications, or another term we've used is building design characteristics. was a future step identified in the long-range facilities plan. So, and education specifications are a set of guidelines that establish the way school buildings support programs and curriculum and establish baseline facilities standards across the district. So as specific school sites approach significant modernization, as we're looking at with a couple of our high schools and Fabian School, building design criteria are tailored through a master planning process to suit individual school, program, and community through staff, student, and community engagement with design professionals. So we're engaging the master planning work at Roosevelt and Franklin right now, and we're working with these specifications and this vision to influence that master planning process. So we've approached this in a couple phases. This spring, we engaged in the visioning process, which is to guide the future design of district school buildings. And we're currently in the process of working with teachers, principals, students in the development of educational specifications that'll be used by those design teams to undertake renovations in school buildings. And so that work has been ongoing this summer and this fall, and we hope to be back next month to give you an update on those specifications and get into some of those designs. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to John Weeks, and John and Nancy will kind of go through the process that we've undertaken the last couple months, and I will sit here and advance the slides.
So thank you, Paul. I think what we would like to do is explain the process that has resulted in the document that's sitting in front of you. This is a summary. The way we'll explain it to you will be in summary form. There's lots more detail to it, and if you have questions about the detail of it, please feel free to ask at the end as we go along. So the visioning process started in March of this year. We wanted to build on the work that had been completed to date by the school district in the previous years that led up to the successful capital bond passing. We did not want to revisit that which had taken place, but rather build on top of, reinforce, and do a deeper dive into exactly what that all meant. Most importantly, we wanted to engage communities in Portland that generally don't have a voice with Portland. So while the work that had taken place in advance of the bond had a lot of the usual suspects, was a term we heard a lot, we wanted to engage those that may not have had a chance to say or to provide input, but are your friends and are your observers and are the people in the Portland community who want to participate and provide that which we were looking for. And so we began by creating a list of community partners, we call them community conversations. That was augmented by the Executive Advisory Committee, which was formed to provide us guidance as we went along, 20 to 30 citizens from across Portland. And we wanted to, in fact, complement the last 5 years, as I said earlier. In all, we had about 16 community conversations. Those were lasting anywhere from 2 to 4 hours apiece. There was more than 360 participants, and there was approximately 200 participants in an online survey that we used at the end to check to see if what we were doing was okay. To give you a sense of who they are, to my right and to your left is a list of the people that were involved. We were very grateful for the people that came to the table, and we asked that they provide the conveners. They be the conveners of the group. So we didn't look to edit or cherry pick those that would come. It was more important to have the group be the convener and to bring the people to this table, to our table, to the table of the visioning process, those who were thoughtful, had something to say as it related to the development of facilities in Portland Public Schools as you go forward, had ideas that had not been heard or had been heard but could have been rounded out, and had a perspective from their communities of color, or their communities of expertise, or in some cases their communities of business and knowledge. All of that came together in ways that were unique, we believe, and the outcomes were actually quite powerful. To that degree, we had a series of things we wanted to make sure happen. Our interest was to find way to ask them, if we are moving forward, if Portland Public Schools is moving forward, what is it that we need to be aware of to create meaningful learning environments for our students and for the teachers that teach there and the communities and the neighbors that use our schools. The second way is, how do we effectively forge relationships with the neighborhoods and the communities in which our schools reside? And what is it that schools can provide, school facilities can provide, and what is it about the programs that we might think about in order to ensure that as we go forward, our schools become powerful centers of the communities in which they reside. And last, we wanted to ensure that we had places, we wanted to understand from their perspective, what does it mean to be safe? And what does it mean to be healthy? And what is an accessible school environment, regardless of who you are and what you are, your disabilities or your strengths. And most important, we wanted to know how that works for all children and all families and the staff that work within the schools itself. Those are the challenges we brought in each of the community conversations, and thousands of comments were collected as we went along.
Good evening. My name's Nancy Hamilton. Thank you for having us here tonight. This has been a very exciting process for all of us. As John has suggested, we really were inspired by the feedback we got across a very diverse array of communities that we met with during the course of this time. And many of you here tonight were part of one or more of those conversations as well. And Andrew sat on our executive advisory committee before his tenure began here on the board, so thank you in particular for that. And so as you'll see through the next few slides, we've just sort of highlighted certain groups. Different people, and in one way different people had different things to say, but the most interesting, intriguing outcome of all of these conversations was how much we have in common as opposed to how much we differ. And that was, it was hopeful to hear that as we went through. We didn't come to the end of this process and go, uh-oh, we've got this bifurcated series of communities who don't see things the same way. And so what I'll do is just give you a few highlights from various conversations we had. High school students were interesting, and perhaps one of the most important conversations we had. On the one hand, you know, they wanted to remind us that the food sucks. You know, you got to do something about cafeteria food. They wanted more ubiquitous Wi-Fi. They didn't have enough room. They wanted more places to gather as kids in groups so that they could just hang out, have it be more of a welcoming place during non-school hours. But the other thing they said that was very important, we felt from a facilities perspective, was that schools are, what they're looking for after school requires a different, relevant learning environment today than has historically been available to them. They want real-world learning environments, everything from career technical education to more opportunities to work directly with the business community and the various sectors out in the public where they're going to eventually be. To Director Curler's comment earlier, we want to be looking at lifelong learners and how do we create opportunities that connect those dots for them. That was a big deal to students. It was also a big deal to teachers. Teachers in particular, oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong order. I can talk about the futurists. The futurist group we met with was probably the most fascinating in that, we had a guy who's building a do-it-yourself spacesuit for Mars. We had people who were thinking so far beyond today that their mindset is important to hear, because they really are where our students are going to be in 20 years. And they're already there on the bleeding edge of some of this work. And probably the most important message we heard from them was change happens more and more quickly as we move forward. Learning happens all the time, everywhere, and schools have to be the centerpiece for that during these first years in people's lives. And you can't keep doing things the way you've done them, because the world that all of these young people are about to inherit is going to be operating on a very, very different scale. And we've got to play catch up. And they were very excited, though, about how we can, you know, sort of the state of our buildings today is so far behind that it's actually kind of good news, because we don't have to try to figure it out around the edges. We have this moment, this perfect storm at this incredible time of learning and future thinking, where we can actually take these schools and really leapfrog over today's world and move to tomorrow's world. So systems thinking, lifelong learning, change all the time, teaching and learning happening everywhere, and how can buildings be part of that? It was a very inspiring conversation. It was pretty heady in some ways, but it was interesting. We also met with teachers, and teachers were an interesting group to talk to, because on the one hand, they, along with students, are the people in these buildings every day. And they had some very specific tactical, on-the-ground desires and needs and concerns. So storage and, you know, testing capacity and better technology and bigger classrooms and things like that. But they also talked in a quite inspired way about all the work that's been happening in this district over the last several years, and feeling a real sense of movement, and that the capital bond has created sort of some energy that is unusual, because we're a district that is often having a conversation about resource constraints. And for this moment, we're saying, you know what, we actually can do something here. And teachers were very excited about that. They want flexible learning space, a lot more focus on teaching and learning moving forward, as you all know, is around this broad range of individualized learning, one-on-one, and then broader group learning, multidisciplinary learning, multi-grade learning, and getting out of that sort of historical silo teaching learning approach, and needing buildings to be more flexible and breathe with that. The other, I'm trying to remember, the parents obviously had a lot to say. We always do, wearing my parent hat. These are these folks' kids. The interesting thing about the parent groups we spoke to is how diverse the groups were, but how aligned the message was. So we had a Migrant Parent Association meeting all in Spanish, and I speak some Spanish. It was really fun to have a chance to have a conversation in a language other than English with parents who are here with their kids. They're very hopeful for their kids' future, and listening to that on the ground for kids was very exciting. Karina Ruiz, who works with DAWA, her first language is Spanish, and she helped lead this. And it was just a very exciting day. We then met with special education parents. We met with the Black Parent Initiative. We met with the Latino Network, which was comprised of not just parents, but other folks in the Latino community, which is, as we know, the single largest growing community here, and how do we ensure that we're supporting culturally relevant, culturally sensitive thinking as we move forward. And the special ed community was pretty interesting in particular, because so much learning with children with special needs is individualized already. And when you look at future teaching and learning models, it's more and more of that. And so, interestingly, the special ed community wasn't saying, we want this, we want that. They were saying, let us show you how we're doing successful work and how we can mainstream some of it. And it was a very generous, thoughtful, inspired conversation from the special ed community in particular. I think that generally there were a couple of key themes that were ubiquitous. One was that folks wanted schools to be more inviting, more welcoming. Listening earlier this evening to some of the conversations, and Director Buell, your comment about cultural sensitivities. We have a very diverse community that goes to our schools, and finding ways to make that feel inviting the minute you are near the building. And having culturally sensitive and relevant books in the libraries, murals on the walls, opportunities to teach and learn all day long throughout the building. We also heard a lot about safety, and there was a pretty broad range of perspective on that. I think if there was one issue where we heard a variety of solutions to making sure that we're safe, it was on the safety issue. Some people felt it was important to have everyone know each other, and that creates safety. Others wanted cameras and swipe cards, and so that's going to be a big issue from a new building perspective that the district is going to be challenged with. And we got a lot of really important information that we hope that you weave into those decisions at the building level. People wanted the buildings to be more healthy. And that stemmed from food and what people ate, but also around light and air. And that was a comment we heard everywhere, no matter who we spoke to. Light is important, air is important. People are healthier that way, and you all know the absentee numbers around teacher absenteeism from asthma and other air-related issues that impact not just achievement, but also your bottom line operations costs because people are not healthy. And so that's a very big deal. I think the biggest takeaway from this, and having toiled in a lot of this work for many years, as many of you have, is that people said to us, we're really excited. We're really feeling heard. This is kind of cool. We have this moment where we're going to kind of start doing things differently, and the stakes are really high, but the opportunity is huge. And people felt heard, they felt acknowledged, they're very concerned that this is not a one and done conversation, and the district has made a steadfast commitment to continue this dialogue as the work evolves. This is going to continue to happen through the DAGs and through other community engagement opportunities moving forward. And I would implore you to hold true to that, because the community is really excited about continuing this conversation, and they have really cool stuff to talk about. And I think the final comment I would make, as you all know, only 20% of the folks in Portland Public School District geographically actually have kids in our schools, and the other 80% live here too. And no matter who we spoke with, everyone agrees that schools are center of community. They're a vital part of a strong and thriving, healthy neighborhood. And there's a great deal of excitement about what this might accomplish for us for the long haul. And we're excited to see what happens next. It's been a really incredible opportunity for me and for all of us. And Paul, I want to do a hat tip to Paul Cathcart, who is a quiet, thoughtful, steadfast staff person. You have a gem in him. So please remember that. He might be quiet, but he's a really hard worker who's got his eye on the ball. So he made our job a lot easier. Thank you.
You'll be back in a minute. So I'd like to explain, or I'd like to, what Nancy talked about was the 3 months from March till May, in which we were 2-3 times a week dealing with people.
I don't mean to cut you short, but do we have about 5 more minutes?
Yep.
Okay, that'd be great.
Perfect. So at the end of May, we brought everybody back together. All of those groups, or representatives of those groups, to the Rose Garden for a half-day summit. And the purpose was to test to see if, in fact, what we had heard and how we heard it was properly represented. And we did that in 2 ways. One is we asked a series of critical questions of them. Those questions were developed actually by the people who were in the conversations, not us. So they asked things of each other about if schools could tap everyone as a resource for learning what if schools could tap everyone as a resource for your child's learning? Are we ready for change? And are we ready to do the heavy and hard work? Are we ready to redesign our schools and make them vibrant and wonderful places? We tested that through a series of in 2 ways. One is through a conversation with them in which they could report out, and 2, electronically. We asked them to look at and hear what we had heard and to weigh in if in fact it was correct, just by using an electronic voting machine. And everybody in the room was individually had a chance to vote, and surprisingly, I thought for ourselves, the lowest was 70%. Usually we were hanging between 75 and 80% of everybody in the room saying, yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly what we were talking about. That's exactly what we were looking for, and that is exactly what we want you to carry forward. Those things were cataloged again. They were put forward in the document that you have, and they are in 4 categories. One is about teaching and learning, and please read what that would be. The other one is about the learning environment itself. and how critically important it is that a learning environment does what is necessary today and in the future for teaching and learning to thrive. The third has to do with the communities and our schools and what that really means. And there's not only a framing statement that is in your document, but a series of guiding principles underneath that to help better flesh that out. And last was this whole idea of what we call facility support, but you have to do, whatever has to happen here has to be sustainable, not only in the green way, but in the operating budget way, that whatever emerges and how it emerges, it's really important that it lasts. And so the careful attention needs to take place to that, so that as you go forward and do the heavy and hard work of designing through the lens of this vision statement, you accomplish that. Which was all tested again in an online survey, and we had 200 some odd responses, and that was again confirmed. So all of that was brought together and given, or consolidated, written, and it's in front of you today.
I know we're under a time crunch, so I'll just close with the notion that this has been exciting work. The community has some high hopes for what next, and people are sitting at the edge of their seats now that the work has been allocated for the Franklin and Roosevelt projects, and the Fabian project is now on the street, and RFPs are going to start coming in, and people are leaning in and looking and excited and want to help. And we look forward to opportunities to create more community engagement on this.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, first of all, for the presentation and this information. It's really exciting. I was glad to see in your presentation that you did a conversation with teachers, because when I looked in this earlier today, when I look at the executive advisory committee members and your list of who you had community conversations with, and even the summary of the conversations, I didn't see that group in there. So I don't know if it was just an oversight or not, but
They probably identified more specifically.
Let me clarify that we had teachers in a variety of groups, but not teachers specifically. And the second phase of the project, the educational specifications, we've had meetings with high school teachers and K-8 teachers, and those meetings are ongoing, getting into more specifics that are bridging kind of the vision discussion into the more specific layout and design of spaces. So the visioning, the community conversations, we've had teachers as part of those conversations, but not as specific conversations with teachers.
Not exclusively teachers in a room.
because I know I saw you had administrators in one group and administrators of color, and so I just want to make sure that voice was in there. So it sounds like it's in there, not as a standalone, but
correct
throughout, and that those are the conversations you're having now.
Right.
There were teachers in several.
As a group?
What's that?
Did we invite them as a group?
We did.
Yes.
And so they chose not to participate, is that?
That's correct.
That's our understanding.
Thank you.
Okay, that answers. Okay. So as I'm looking at your vision statement, in some ways it's wonderful, and in some ways there's a couple of pieces that I feel like are missing, and I'm trying to understand when we as a board have an opportunity, rather than just voting yes or no, do we have an opportunity to impact this still?
Yeah.
Yes?
Mhm.
Okay, is this our
This is a
time?
draft.
This is our moment?
Mhm.
Okay. There's three things in terms of the vision statement that I think are important, and I'm not sure if they're in here strongly enough. One is that we want these to be environmentally friendly, sustainable buildings. And again, it's in there in different places, but it's not in the vision statement, which is, I think, what you were actually going to be asked to adopt, right? And another one would be that we want our buildings to ultimately reduce our operational facilities costs so we can put more money in the classroom. And at least that's something during the campaign that we talked about quite a bit, that we want the systems to function in such a way in terms of energy efficiency, water savings, all of that, that ultimately the costs of our buildings will go down, maintenance, all of that, and we'll have more money to put toward teaching and learning. And a final one is the whole notion of our schools as community centers or community hubs, and kind of that 24/7, 365-day use for the community. And I guess when I'm looking at this education vision, I think about things like air conditioning. I mean, I hope that all of these buildings will have air conditioning in them so that we can talk about a balanced calendar, a year-round use of our buildings. So those three things, as I was reading through this, I didn't feel that they were in the vision statement as strongly as I'd like to see them.
Thanks for those comments. We'll bring them back.
Go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for doing what you did. I think maybe we've been accused of not doing public engagement well, and sometimes, and maybe that's deserved, and this seems to be done really very well. So thank you. And curious from a budget perspective, what's the cost of phase 1 and what's the cost of phase 2 for this public engagement?
I'm not going to have the correct dollar amounts off the top of my head. I can provide that again with you, but it's a lot of work has gone into phase 1. There's a lot of time involved here. More meetings in phase 1 than phase 2. So I think I'll get back to you with those numbers versus quoting something off the top of my head. I'll provide that with you.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Dr. Buell?
It's kind of a dumb question, I think, but after following up on Bobby's really good questions, terrific questions, seriously, Bobby, really good. Are the windows going to open in all of our buildings that we're building? Because I spent my entire life practically in buildings where the windows didn't open, and we, knocked down Adams High School after it became Whitaker because the windows didn't open, and it gets 110 and the windows don't open, and down goes the air conditioning. I mean, is that part of our specs in the long run, that the windows will open in the buildings?
So,
I mean, it is a dumb question, but not from my perspective.
I don't think it's a dumb question. We heard a lot in the visioning process about light and air and needing more of that everywhere. That's going to follow into the educational specifications we're developing now. In a separate effort, we have construction design guidelines that'll get into some very specific details about how things are going to be built. So I don't think we can say every single window in a building will open,
Right,
but there's
but I mean, there are going to be windows that'll open.
more light, more air, especially in the classrooms, is a high priority.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I'd just like to make one more comment. Again, I'd like to echo Nancy's thanks to Andrew, who provided a lot of assistance in pulling some students together, as did Director Morton, who pulled together a conversation at the NAIA Family Center for us. That was a very powerful conversation, and appreciate his assistance there.
Okay. Thank you all very much for coming this evening, and we will see you in early September.
On or about the 9th.
For adoption. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to now move on to a public hearing for alternative contracting process, construction management general contractor for Franklin and Roosevelt High Schools remodernization process. At this point, the board will convene as the local contract review board. Oregon revised statutes and our own public contracting rules provide special procedures to allow for exemption from competitive bidding and instead use an alternative contracting method. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, and I'll ask Elaine Baker, who's our Director of Procurement, and Jim Owens, who is our Executive Director of Office of School Modernization, to come on down and present this piece.
I'm not sure of the formalities, but at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and open the public hearing for your presentation, and we'll go from there. I'm sorry, yep. I'll open the public hearing. Mr. Director Buell wants a gavel on the Franklin High School alternative contracting process. Thank you.
Good evening, Co-Chair Belisle, board members, Superintendent Smith. My name is Elaine Baker. I'm the Program Director of Purchasing and Contracting for Portland Public Schools. With me is Jim Owens. Jim is the Executive Director of the Office of School Modernization. You have before you the report providing our draft findings and recommendation to approve the use of a construction manager, general contractor, or CMGC alternative contracting method for both the Franklin Full Modernization Project and the Roosevelt Full Modernization Project. We've considered these projects over the last several months, and we've determined that each of them is well suited to a CMGC process. These are tightly scheduled, multifaceted projects. The CMGC allows the district to engage the general contractor early in the design phase, making the project more efficient. This is an alternative process to our standard process, and it will reduce costs by allowing for coordination and value engineering during the initial phase of the project, thereby reducing errors and the need to make changes later on. This also reduces the need for contract changes to the drawings and specifications. And both projects are very complex. Both campuses have historical value and components, and its specialized expertise is needed to manage this complexity and the work successfully in challenging conditions. Utilizing an RFP process instead of low bid allows the district to select a CMGC by evaluating a firm's qualifications, specialized expertise, and experience on like projects in addition to price. Finally, the district has successfully utilized this alternative RFP process in previous projects. So do you have any questions for us?
So that, just to walk us through here how we're doing this. So this is a public hearing for Franklin's. Shortly after this one, we will move on to Roosevelt's. At one point, we will close Roosevelt's and Franklin's, and then we'll have a motion and a second to adopt or deny the recommendation. And at that time, we would have a discussion about the resolution. So at this point, we'd be asking questions about what Ms. Baker, I almost said Ms. Holt, Ms. Baker provided us, or any questions about what we just heard, specifically around Franklin. Sure, Director Buell.
So if you have a certain number of people that a certain number of companies that you would expect to bid on this anyway? I mean, up front? You're bidding for the whole thing. You want to start them up front and run them through. So do they bid to do that? Is that how it works?
Well, I respond to that question, Director Buell. The approach with CMGC is to retain a builder who initially provides pre-construction phase services. So as we're going through the design process, there actually is a single firm, a builder, a general contractor who works with the design team. Subsequently, we work to develop what's called a guaranteed maximum price, and with a GMP, as it were, and with the GMP, then in conjunction with district staff, the general contractor actually bids the trade work, some of which they can self-perform based on discussion. So typically on a large project like this, you'd expect somewhere between 15 to 18 firms.
15 to 18 firms at the outset that are presenting in order to be chosen?
Not at the outset. It just
How many firms at the outset?
At the outset, it would just be one firm.
So how do you decide what one firm does the outset?
It's based on a qualification-based selection process, very similar to what is used for design professionals. And so the builders that compete on the work actually provide input during design. And then when the construction phase actually begins, that's when they actually will competitively bid the trade work for the subcontractors.
Go back to the beginning, because I got lost in the middle.
Okay.
So how do you decide who the first firm is that you're going to work with? That's what I want to know.
The firm is selected based on an RFP solicitation, a request for proposal solicitation.
So how many firms will do that?
So typically, with the RFP that's solicited, there are a number of firms that will respond to that with written proposals, and district staff will go through a scoring process, a ranking, if you will, and then the top-ranked firm, we then would enter into a contract for pre-construction phase services.
So you might have let's say five firms that put in, and then you would choose between those five for the original person to do the pre-construction?
My experience is it's typically somewhere between 5 and 12 firms that would respond to a RFP proposal.
Thank you.
And what would happen if once this firm is selected, that you couldn't agree on, there was not agreement on not to, a maximum guaranteed not to exceed?
That's a great question, Director Curler. The process that we follow, and again, it's very similar to what we do with architects, engineers. If we cannot reach agreement on the guaranteed maximum price, district under purchasing rules has the ability to go to the next firm to reach agreement on the guaranteed maximum price. It's very unusual for that to occur, but that flexibility is built into it. So when we contract with a firm to do the pre-construction phase services, and they work with us over the period of time, and our thinking is they would come on early in design, so they would be with us for something over a year. If we're unable to reach agreement, then we actually can go back to the second ranked firm and to negotiate, if you will, with that firm to reach a GMP that is consistent with that district's budget.
Thank you.
How do you control, in the end, the making sure you come in under budget? I mean, do we, if we budget for somebody and they say this is going to cost more than we thought, 3 months into the project, do we say too bad, finish it, budget it?
Well,
if we got a budget with you, that's what you do.
We have the ability to work with the design team on what the budget is for the work. We had a methodology that was developed to determine what the budgets were. So as the general contractor comes on and is working with us on pre-construction phase, they know what the price limitations are. Where it can become challenging is if the budget is inadequate to complete the scope of work. Then there are adjustments that are made at that time.
Well, yeah, that's my question. How do we make those adjustments? Because if you say, well, let's say this costs $23 million, some part of the project, and that's what they bid, and it comes in, and guess what? It's going to cost $23.5 million. Do we say, well, too bad, you should have budgeted, you should have given us a better bid? Or do we then kick them more money? How do we make that decision? I'm always looking at these public projects where they end up spending more money than they budgeted. If you come into my house and say it's going to cost you $30,000 to do the kitchen, I don't want to hear that later it's $35,000. I mean, it cost me $5,000, but we're talking millions of dollars here. How do we control that?
It's controlled through the scope development, through the design development documents that establish what the pricing is. I think what you're asking is when we go through the competitive bidding process that the general contractor does in conjunction with the district, you determine what the pricing is.
What I'm asking is if as they move along, they find out they screwed up on the bid and underbidded and they really can't perform the bid, that's the question I'm asking. Do we then say, hey, that's the brakes, buddy, because that was the bid, and you bid it, and you bid to do this work, and you did? Or do we somehow say, or do we turn around and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, you underbid, so we'll give you some more money? How do we make that decision?
We actually have specific sub-budgets for the trade components, so we know what our mechanical, electrical, plumbing components are. And so when we go out to bid that trade work, we know what our limitations are, we know what we can afford. It's very similar to when you do competitive bidding, you know what your budget is, and if you're unable to achieve it for the amount that you have budgeted, you have the ability to back away from it and then to restructure your construction documents. Because the builder is part of developing the construction documents with the design team, you have a lot more control over the budget aspects. There's also a contingency component that's built into the guaranteed maximum price. Typically, it's 10%, and so that can be used for certain adjustments. But it's a very proven method to manage costs. And because of the contractor's involvement during the design, you significantly reduce the number of change orders during the construction phase.
Thank you.
Can I ask what we're being asked to do here? It sounds
Sure.
like there's a traditional way of bidding a project, and what we're specifically being asked to do is to do it a different way.
That's correct.
And that's the main thing that we're
This
being
is a
asked to do
public hearing
tonight.
for that.
Okay.
Yep.
And can I ask if, did we use the alternative contracting method of construction that, for Rosa Parks, do you know, when we did Rosa Parks? Did we use a low bid or
I can answer
not?
that. We actually did that in partnership with the Housing Authority of Portland. The Housing Authority of Portland had a contract with Walsh, and they contracted with Walsh, so the district did not
So it
perform
wasn't
the
actually the
competitive
district doing it.
procurement. The Housing Authority of Portland performed that competitive procurement.
Okay.
We have, as we noted though, that there are several projects in which the district has utilized this. One some while ago was the Da Vinci High Performance Classroom.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me that in general, we wouldn't necessarily want to go with low bid, so, you know, as long as we're with our budget parameters, it makes sense to me.
No further comments. Ms. Houston, do we have anyone signed up for public testimony?
No.
No. Okay. Then I will close the public hearing on Franklin High School and open the public hearing on Roosevelt High School alternative contracting process. I'm assuming our questions have been taken care of. Ms. Houston, do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question.
Okay.
So when we talk about grant and exemption from the traditional design bid build process or the least cost process, is that traditional basically Oregon law? And so what we're doing is that's the reason we have to vote on this, is we have to get an
Correct.
exception from Oregon. Okay,
And
thank
this
you.
is also, this process is specified in great detail in Oregon law as well.
Okay.
So we are following the exemption process under ORS 279C.
Anytime we use a process other than traditional, which is our invitation to bid, and use an RFP for public improvement construction, we're required to request an exemption. And so with the exemption, then staff has the ability to prepare the RFP, the solicitation, which we haven't done yet. That won't come until later in the fall, and then move forward with it.
But basically, as the board, you have to come to us, and we are the ones who, okay, great.
And then we would
Thank
come
you.
back to you again when the award recommendation would be made.
With no public comment, I'll close the public hearing on Roosevelt High School and ask the board now to consider Resolution 4796, Franklin High School Full Modernization Project, and Roosevelt High School Full Modernization Project exemption from competitive bidding and authorization for use of construction manager, general contractor, alternative contracting method. That was a mouthful.
So moved.
Director Regan moves and Director Knowles seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 4796. Is there any other board discussion on the resolution? Hearing none, we'll now vote on Resolution 4796. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 4796 is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Davidson voting
Yes.
yes. Thank you both. The board will now reconvene back to its regular meeting. Moving on to monthly capital bond update. Tonight we're going to receive our monthly update, capital improvement bond. Superintendent Smith.
Yes, I'd like to ask Jim Owens to come on up and Michelle Sheridan. Is it just you? Jim Owens. Great. Jim, come on up.
Well, thank you, Superintendent Smith, and good evening again, Board. I get to stay here for another presentation. Tonight, as the Superintendent mentioned, we're updating bond program status for the month of August. And we're going to mix it up tonight and provide a little different format to share some experiences that we've had at one of the schools that's in our Improvement Project 2013, Wilson High School. And there's three of us up here tonight because we want to share with you the educator perspective at the school in terms of how this work will influence students when they return next month. We also have, and that's Erica Myers, seated over to my far right. Erica is the business manager at Wilson High School and has been very involved in this work. Seated next to me is Steve Anderson, who is one of the owners of PNC Construction, who is the general contractor that's doing the work at Wilson High School. And Steve will actually walk us through some slides and highlight some of the work and highlight some of the accomplishments. You may recall that when we were planning this work at Wilson, we weren't confident we'd be able to finish all the roof tear-off and replacement over the 9-week construction period. And PNC showed us that they were more than up to the challenge, and we're really pleased to report that that work will complete on time and on budget. So we're really pleased with that, and Steve will highlight some of those accomplishments as well. Before I introduce, or before we get started with the comments from Eric and Steve, I'd like to briefly touch on the balanced scorecard that's in your board packets. Information on the balanced scorecard highlights changes from month to month, and while I'm not going through a formal presentation of it, I'd just like to highlight a couple of changes that have occurred. First, we've added 3 more active projects on our listing, our 2 high schools, Franklin and Roosevelt, now that we have our 2 design teams aboard, and also our Improvement Project 2014, which is next summer's work. And you may recall on consent agenda at the last meeting, you actually approved staff to execute contracts to 3 firms so that we could get started with the work at 12 of our schools for next summer. That's seismic, roofing, ADA, and science lab improvements. So we're really excited to get more active projects on since the program really is picking up steam. Secondly, in your packets attached to the balanced scorecard is a financial update, which highlights how we're looking at the program across the 8-year timeline. And in there you'll see how staff has structured the projects in terms of budgets, revisions, adjustments that have been made, as well as forecasts. And you'll notice as you look at the document that we are projecting being under budget, not only because of our experience this summer, but also as we look out into the future, we're not at this point anticipating using contingency. So it's a report that we'll be providing on a monthly basis to you, whether we report here or not. And then thirdly, in finalizing the work on Improvement Project 2013, pleased to say that we're on schedule and budget, and we've been visible to the community throughout the summer, which was an important objective as part of our transparency strategy, and we've gotten a lot of interest and a lot of attention, I think, on the work. All of the schools, all 6 of the schools, will have ready in time for the return of teachers on the 28th, and for students on September 4th. So we're really pleased with that. We do have some construction punch work that will, by necessity, extend into September, but it'll be done on a not to interfere basis with students and staff. So we're very confident. We also had a project separate from this summer's work. Well, it's part of this summer's work, but it's not an Improvement Project 2014. That being placement of 2 relocatable portable buildings at Fabian K-8. This is very significant. We're adding 4 classrooms there, which will really help with the capacity challenge that they have at that school. And those are relocatable so that they can support some of our construction activities at Roosevelt High School later on. Finally, as a follow-on to a meeting that we had in June when we were presenting a program update, you had asked about the number of workers that were on these schools. So we looked at our construction daily reports and estimated over the course of 9 weeks an average of how many workers we had on each, or on a total of all 6 of the schools. And it's coming out to approximately 150 workers. So that's 150 workers per day over the course of 9 weeks. So I think that's an indicator of the extensive amount of effort that went into this work. And certainly as we went out to look at the schools, you could see a lot of workers on site and very, very busy and getting this important work completed. Okay, what I'd like to do next is introduce Erica, who will talk a little bit about what students can expect when they return next week. So Erica.
So it's interesting because we're getting a lot of conversations through email to myself and to the principal. Is school actually going to start on September 4th? And yes, it is.
Keep wishing, kids. Keep wishing.
It's going to start, and registration typically at Wilson High School happens. Would be next week, but it's actually going to be extended starting on August 28th and 29th. And we're going to be prepared for it, and we're excited to have students in the building on that day. And I'm really excited that we've been able to partner with the facilities department and project managers, and having students in the building, it'll be kind of interesting as we go through. The north side of the building of Wilson High School will not be complete probably until mid-September, but it won't have any problems with students accessing both sides of the building and egress. I don't know, it's been great. Every week has been really nice to be able to meet with project managers. I've met with Randy Miller and Michelle Sheraton and Rolando, and we meet over Baker and Spice over in Hillsdale. And they give us great updates on it, so I felt like we've been really well communicated with, and the process has been really great. Community has been very supportive as well. I'm excited that we're not going to have any drippy classrooms when we return, and some ADA improvements and seismic improvements that will happen. That I'm just really excited for our school.
Thanks, Erica. We'll provide an opportunity for questions after we're complete with our presentation. Next, I'd like to reintroduce Steve Anderson, seated next to me. Steve is an owner with PNC Construction and is the general contractor that's been doing the work at Wilson over the summer. And Steve has some slides that he'll be showing us that'll highlight the work. So
well, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Jim, and school board for having me as your guest. I have a few fun facts about Wilson. We have 2.62 acres of new roof. That's acres. We have 2 local roofing subcontractors that, because of the size, actually combined their sources together. They're competitors on most jobs. On this one, they're a joint venture with PNC. Very unique, but due to the size and our ability to get it done in one summer, that's our strategy to get the work done. We have 49 working days on this project. With the contract over $4 million, that's over $100,000 a day in work. That's a lot of work getting done every day. The peak number of workers, Jim alluded to this, total district-wide on the projects, we had 73 working on one day, on one site. We average between 45 and 50 workers. And I will say that safety is priority number 1. We've had no incidences and no recordables, which is outstanding work from everybody on the site. That's very important to PNC and very noteworthy on this project. And I do have a few slides. I wasn't quite sure how to.
Thanks, Terry. Oh, there we go.
No peeking. Okay, cool. Is this just right here, Terry? Okay. Okay, so this is an aerial view of Wilson High School before we started work back in June. And Superintendent, you may see some leaking holes there from the buckets. I can remember on the first day when we had the groundbreaking, that was very noteworthy. You see the pool up there on the left, which we made operational all during the summer. So this is before we started work. This is a photo in the PNC office with all the team members, from the architect, who are representatives from Portland Public Schools, our roofing subcontractors, their safety manager. So this is the infamous group hug. And I can say to this day, we could still have that same meeting and everybody would have a smile on their face, which is very, very fun to have that kind of group mentality for this project. A lot of detail here, but just in summary, this is our logistics plan of how to get the work done in one summer. You'll see a lot of areas. Some of the smaller print is some dates. So this was put together by our field staff of how to get the work done before we started the work, dividing it up between Snyder Roofing and McDonald Weddle, work after hours, all that good stuff. So everybody had a plan going into it. Very important there. And I always say construction is a lot of nuts and bolts and all that kind of stuff, but really it's about the people. So these are photos taken about a week ago of our folks out on the job site. This is over the auditorium doing some tear off. You just see the closeness of working and all that, the stuff that goes on that roof. Here's a photo looking through the courtyard. And as I say, my wife went to Wilson High School, and she calls this the H courtyard. So she's very familiar with the H courtyard. I assume it's still called that. Up in the top left is a tower crane, which is a tall crane just to lift materials onto the roof. Very unique, but of a project this size, it really helped with schedule and logistics and safety. Here we just have some photos of folks doing their work. See hard hats, the boots, gloves, All that safety is important to us. A tie-off there in the left-hand side if he gets close to the edge. Here we have 3 fellows working on the infamous tar bucket as they put tar onto the roof. These are 2 PNC carpenters here doing some event work on the roof. See them with their safety vest, hard hats, and just getting into the details, as I say. Some more photos there. Fellow on the left is the safety observer, just making sure things are going correctly, nobody gets too close to the edge. Here is the north entry that I think you referred to as not quite getting done as school starts, but it is isolated. A lot of challenges in this area, so work is progressing as planned. And this is a photo taken about 10 days ago from the air, and you can see all the work still going on. Roof getting finished up on the left-hand side, over there on the right or in the center, with the whiter roof, the cap sheet. So on schedule. The auditorium up there in the top left is figured out a very innovative way to get that done on time. So that was a real challenge there. Just a lot of work going on the roof. An interesting story, if you see our trailer down there at the left, the white trailer kind of at the bottom, there was a elderly lady that walked through that parking lot every day to the market. So when we mobilized in June, we put up fences and didn't allow that. And I don't know if Ken is here with PNC, but one of our other fellows that was on site escorted this elderly lady across the site every day. She says, I've been going this way for 40 years. I'll be darned if I'm not going to go this way while you guys are here working during the summer. Just kind of a fun story, and that's how we approached it. So we escorted her across there and built quite a friend there. And then I did want to allude, the fellow there on your left is Mitchell Angelo from Benson. He worked with us for 5 days as a summer intern, and the fellow on the right is a project engineer. This is Mitchell in the office. And each day he shadowed a different person. And his favorite experience on day 1 was opening the mail, because there's a ton of mail. Okay? On day 2, he's a project engineer. He said he got to learn the paperwork side, went to Wilson High School and saw a view from the roof. It was really cool. Day 3, he worked with our estimator. He got to see how a job was put together, how estimates work, and what things cost. And he said that that was one of the most exciting days that he found for PNC. On day 4, he followed our delivery person and our tool expert. So he got to fix tools, he got to purchase some new tools, and he said, except for sitting in the car while we drove from job to job, it was really a good time. And then day 5, he worked with the project manager for the Wilson High School project, Brian Shoemaker. He got to go to the meeting, and he said he got to see how a huge printer works. And he did say that there's a lot of papers. The meeting was kind of long and kind of boring, but he learned a lot. So Mitchell could not be here tonight, but I did want to give a summary of his experience for the 5 days working alongside the PNC folks. We felt like he got a great experience. He learned a lot, and he was involved in the Wilson High School project, so he can certainly say that that was one of his projects for the summer. So that's all I had for a summary of the work.
Thank you, Steve. And PNC is an example of just one contractor who's engaged students. We had 4 builders, 4 generals who worked on our improvement project 2013, and each have had a number of students who've been involved. But I think that's indicative of the kind of experience the students are having on these construction projects. At this point, I'd like to invite any questions, comments that you may have.
I'll just as a Wilson neighbor, I live about a block, so my house is just off one of those, the aerial view, which really appreciate seeing the photos. And I just want to say how much, just as a neighbor, the great work that you all have been doing, and just on Saturdays as well. But, it's just been, I'm out there with my dogs every day. I don't get the personal escort through the site. But that's okay. That's okay. I'm willing to go around the fence. That's no problem. Anyway, just thank you so much, and really excited to know that kids are coming back without leaks in the classroom. I had a question real quick about the trim that you have at the upper edge. And does that have any seismic structural function?
Not necessarily that trim. I'm not sure of the specific piece, but...
Well, just on the edge of the top edge of the brick wall, all around the building, there appears to be a new kind of trim, I call it, but I don't know what the technical
Yeah, so
term is.
you're talking about the parapet. So we did do
Okay.
seismic upgrade to that parapet as we tied in the
Okay.
new roof. And probably what you're seeing is the sheet metal flashing that caps everything off. So
Okay.
that in itself doesn't have any,
But
but the work
underneath-
that we've done, yeah, that's part
Okay.
of this upgrade with the roof.
Okay, because I figured that was the seismic tie-in that helps strengthen building to some degree.
It's actually not a seismic component.
Okay.
It's really helping protect the cap sheet, and it provides more of a watertight integrity
Okay.
feature to the roof.
Okay, that's great. And it also actually looks attractive. It makes it so you can see, even though, because one of the things about roofing projects, of course, is you can't see the improvement necessarily, but it actually looks a lot nicer. So anyway, great work, and I'm just really excited to see it come to completion.
Director Buell?
Steve, do you look for anything that comes out of high school when you hire people?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we look for is a hardworking person. And as I've been in this business almost 30 years now, it's not necessarily the technical knowledge that we see from folks or what their resume looks like, but it's how hard they work. And interesting, when we looked for a summer intern, we were at a career fair back, and I believe it was March or April, and we had folks come up and fill out a little survey, and that's how we landed on Mitchell. He filled out a survey, we got to know him a little bit, and we had about 10 or 12 applications for this summer intern position. So we really look for that, for the hardworking people with the background of just, I want to learn, which typically high school kids, you know, when you get to that point, you have the ones that want to learn a little bit more and have an experience. So that's what we look for.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ruth, will you, I've been to a couple of Wilson football games, and I'm recalling that the school colors are green.
Yes.
So is it a requirement for our contractors to wear their school colors? As soon as you came up, I thought, oh my God, he's wearing green.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy, right? Jim, do we have any more schools with green for their colors that I should be pursuing? No.
I had one more serious question, which is, could you assure me that the roof, as it's now built, is capable of having solar panels on it at some point in the future?
I'll help you out to get it.
Go ahead. Jim would like to answer that question, but if in all seriousness, from a design aspect, I think that's better suited.
That actually is an area that PNC was involved in. The work that our consultant, Solark Engineering, is doing is looking specifically at the feasibility of the crystalline panel array as well as the thin film solar. We're expecting that report here shortly, and it'll give us a very good sense of both the placement potential at the Wilson roof and also about the structural implications. I would add, just in doing a quick review of the plans, that because of the type of roof system there, this type of roof will generally be able to accommodate crystalline panel arrays more readily than many of our other schools that are wood truss systems. So.
Well, I'm just recalling that when we were out there that day with the groundbreaking, or whatever we would call it, that there were old solar panels on the roof.
Those are hydronic heating panels, and so the weight would be similar. So, in all likelihood, this roof system would be able to accommodate that.
They were connected with a pool, weren't they?
Correct. Right.
And it was a student project.
And those have been removed.
Yeah.
No, I know that those have
Yeah.
been removed. They were old and removed, but it was more looking ahead that we still have the opportunity to go back and put solar in. Good.
First of all, thank you very much for both of you guys to be here today. It's really exciting to see the work that's going on at Wilson, and I'm thrilled that we're on time and on budget, and away we go. Jim, I had a couple of questions for you on the balanced scorecard. It had to do with the equity perspective. There's one that is red, consultants' percentage payments made to minority women, emerging small business. And then to follow along with the meet student participation, it was great to hear that you had a student who was an intern, but I don't see any indication on the scorecard of student participation with either consultants or with contractors. So I just wanted to see if we were needing to fill in some color there.
We are actually, next month, we're planning to highlight in more detail the number of students that were involved, not only with the builders, but also with our consultant teams.
Great.
And we'll highlight that. This is intended to look at each project separately. So the red cell that is over on the right under program costs is reflective of a single contract that we have with Erie International, and the percentage of MWSB payment is actually below 10% currently.
Okay.
Overall, program-wise, we're right at about 14%.
Okay.
And that
Thank
number
you.
will change from month to month based on
Right.
the invoices that we receive.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you, all three of you, for being here, but especially those folks who aren't normally here with us. Thank you very much. We're going to move on. At our last meeting, Director Buell introduced a resolution to change the board meeting date and time, and we, at that time, tabled the resolution. At our board retreat on last Friday, we talked about the topic, and a new resolution was drafted. Director Buell, I'll ask if you'd be interested in withdrawing your resolution.
Yes, I withdraw that motion.
Great.
And, I think, didn't Bobby second it?
I don't remember who seconded, but
Somebody needs to withdraw the second.
great. So Director Buell rescinds his resolution that the regular board meetings of the school board be held on Tuesday at 6 p.m. unless changed for reasons of conflict by chairpersons of the board. With that, the board will now consider Resolution 4797, a proposal to revise the calendar of regular board meetings for the 2013-2014 school year, is now before the board. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Director Knowles moves and Director Regan seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 4797. Is there any board discussion on the resolution? For those of you at home that are not reading the resolution, it's to ask the staff to come back to the board with a new calendar with board meetings on Monday nights starting at 6 p.m. So I think Mr. Bailey and public comment asked that those also be moved. So that is the new direction we are heading. Make note on your calendars to come join us on Mondays at 6 p.m. The board will now vote on Resolution 4797. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 4797 is approved by a vote of 6-0, with Student Representative Davidson voting?
Yes.
Yes. That also means that Student Representative Davidson can now join us, actually, for the board meetings. He had a conflict with the Constitution team at Grant, which we are very pleased that you get to join us. The board will now consider the remaining items on the business agenda. Ms. Houston, are there any changes to the business agenda?
No.
Okay. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Director Knowles moves and Director Adkins seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Ms. Houston, is there any public comment?
No.
No. Is there any board discussion on the business agenda? Director Buell?
I had a question about, these are all, could someone just explain, pick one and explain what district-wide alternative education services actually consists of? Are we paying them to hire people, or are we paying, how does this particular stuff work?
And actually, Sue Ann Higgins, do you want to, our Chief Academic Officer, is Karina Wolf with us? There she is. Sorry, I thought I saw you earlier and then left. Karina is the Director of Education Options, which does the contracting, and these are community-based organizations that we contract with. And Karina, I'll let you do a little more explanation.
Absolutely. So our community-based, good evening, hi. Our community-based alternative schools, our community-based organizations, we have 14, 2 at the middle school level and 12 at the high school level. And they serve students who the average age is 17.6, excuse me, and more than 6 credits behind in school. So what our alternative schools are is part of our safety net. And so we're educating our students through middle school and high school to post-secondary readiness and high school completion.
So these are basically catch-up.
Yeah.
So if Pathfinders of Oregon, which is $197,313,
Right.
what are we paying for there?
So at Pathfinders, I believe I have it actually in here. We're paying for slots for a set number of students. And at Pathfinders, they specialize in serving pregnant and parenting students. So it's tailor-made to especially to serve our pregnant and parenting students. To wrap around, work with their children, work with them and their educational needs.
How about how many kids are there?
Yeah, I believe there's 32, but I can look.
And they go how often? About?
Every day.
Every day for all year?
Yes.
Basically?
Yeah.
And so for $197,000, we're serving 32 kids, basically every day? I mean, is that what it comes out to?
Correct, and they're.
So how many, what is that, 2 staff, 3 staff, 2 staff?
You know, when we contract with the alternative schools, they hire their staff. And I can look here and say Pathfinders, so it says 27.5. So so what we have for this current school year that we're going to start next week is to serve 27, the funding to serve 27.5 students.
For basically 200,000. So
Correct.
do those numbers work out, say like Rosemary Anderson High School?
Mm-hmm.
It's 1,165,000.
Mm-hmm.
So.
161 students.
161, and that would be how many staff?
So each of the schools, the community-based alternative schools, hire their own staff. And so their responsibility as an alternative school is to meet the requirements for the high schools, for high school completion. So they need to cover all the core content areas, and to what degree they hire a 0.3 in language arts or a 0.5 in math, the school determines that.
Now, how does that benefit us? Is it cheaper to do it with them? Do they do a better job teaching than we do? I mean, we could set up that program in Marshall High School and run all these things in Marshall High School or something, say,
So one
just
of
out the, I mean, how is this benefiting Portland Public Schools, either monetarily or educationally?
That's a great question. So one of the things
Two
that
grades for me tonight, by the way, and only
Good.
one for Curler over there.
There you go. There you go. And the night's not over. So there's a few things that are really unique about alternative schools. One is it's a small school setting, and there's a lot of personalization around our individual student needs. For instance, one of the other programs works with homeless children. So they specialize in certain student populations, and they're really talented and skilled at serving that specific population. The other is, again, for the vast majority of our students, they've gone to series of other high schools or schools, more traditional schools, where they have not been successful. And so one of the other reasons and great gifts that we get from community-based alternative schools is they keep our kids engaged and enrolled. So one of the things we have is we have more information that's in and Superintendent Smith referenced it earlier tonight in our high school school system, the high school redesign system. In that document, it talks about the specific purposes of our alternative programs and how they are part of our continuum of high school services.
Are they cheaper?
I think to some degree they serve in some instances I would say absolutely, and the primary thing that happens though is that they keep our kids in school. And so these are kids who, like I said, have been unsuccessful in other schools, who have been to comprehensive schools, who have been to focus schools, who may have been to other alternative schools, and then they found a place where they have fit. And I heard Director Belisle, I heard you say earlier tonight in one of the conversations about really working, and Director Knowles really talking about students in school fit. And I think that's one of the primary focuses that our alternative schools pay a lot of attention to.
I'm gonna maybe have to talk to you more and not take everybody's time if I can, because I'm still not understanding
And we can
exactly.
actually-
Would that be, I'll just maybe give you a call and we can chat with it if that's okay.
We can
Mr.
actually offer you to
Superintendent?
take you around to visit some of the programs too, which is is really, would help you get a sense of it. The other thing I will say is all of these programs are run by community-based nonprofit organizations, and many of them actually do private fundraising or have wraparound services that are part of the services that they offer as an organization
Right.
that our students benefit from. So frequently, like, we flow through dollars in a contract with a program, and those programs will privately fundraise to match that in a way that actually buys more service for those kids. So it actually ends up being a great partnership, kind of a leveraging partnership that gets more service and more targeted service for specific kids.
One just follow-up question. So are those, the money that we're paying for the kids in these schools, is PPS responsible for any other money outflow that goes with those kids? Or like this one that you mentioned is roughly $7,000 per head. Are we spending any more money on those kids other than that school?
I'm sorry, I guess I'm not
No.
understanding.
Does it cost us more per kid than it does for?
No.
Those
it-
in
I
our
was
our-
wondering, are there other
High school,
expenses that go along with that student
Well, we have
that,
a
Yeah.
that
whole
aren't in
Alted
that contract?
department in
Yeah.
central office, for example,
Right.
and maybe special ed, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's the.
Because trying to get at
the-
Steve's point here, just from a cost standpoint.
The student ratios are the same as far as how the students present in the different populations. So for special education, or for English language learners, or for pregnant and parenting students, the reimbursement rate from the state, or the ADM rate from the state is elevated. It's more than the 1.0 for kind of a general student. So it's the same in that respect.
So it typically flows through.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
No, I've asked enough here.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Wolf.
Thanks, Karina.
The board will now vote on business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
I was a yes.
Thank you. Are there any abstentions? So business agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0, with Student Representative Davidson voting
Yes.
yes. I know Director Buell has, I believe, 2 other motions that he's interested in. In order for us to consider these motions, board members would have to agree to a suspension of our standing rules, which takes a majority of vote. So I'll just ask for a vote. Last time we did it just by general agreement. All those in favor of suspending our rules to consider the 2 motions by Director Buell, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes?
Yes.
All those opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
It doesn't, at this point, it doesn't matter. The additional motions and suspensions of the rules will not be considered this evening, with it being defeated by a vote of 2 to 3, no, 2 to 4, with student representative voting
Yes.
yes. The next meeting of the board will be held on Monday, September 9th, 2013, at 6 p.m. The regular meeting of the board is now adjourned.